My mother-in-law called me to the restaurant she owned so I could wash the dishes there, and when important guests arrived, she said, "Go into the dining hall, country girl, let the guests have a laugh looking at you." But a minute after I walked into the hall, applause broke out from there. I never thought I would one day stand at the threshold of a luxurious restaurant not as a guest, but as the new dishwasher. Least of all did I expect that it would be my mother-in-law Stephanie who offered me this honorable position with such a contemptuous gleam in her eyes. But let's start from the beginning. 3 years ago, life seemed like a fairy tale. I, Gwen Verdi, a simple girl from the small town of Maplewood, worked as a preschool teacher and truly loved my job. At the town talent show I was singing a romance when my eyes met those of a tall dark-haired man in the third row. He was looking at me as if enchanted. After my performance he came up, introduced himself as Cullen Rothman, and invited me for a cup of coffee. Our romance developed at lightning speed. Cullen surrounded me with care and attention, showered me with gifts I had never even dreamed of. 6 months later, he proposed. Only then did I learn that my chosen one was the only son of Stephanie Rothman, the owner of the restaurant chain Empire Taste, known in our region as a ruthless businesswoman with an iron grip. Our first meeting with my mother-in-law took place in the flagship restaurant of the chain, the Aristocrat. I was nervous but hoped to make a good impression, wearing my best dress, though it wasn't designer, and styling my hair into an elegant updo. Stephanie, a graceful woman with perfect posture and raven black hair, gave me an appraising look. Her impeccable designer suit probably cost as much as my 6 months' salary. Her lips, painted scarlet, curved into a smile that never touched her cold gray eyes. "So this is the little singer you found, darling." Those words, spoken with feigned ease, marked the beginning of a 3-year hell. From that day, Stephanie began a systematic campaign to destroy me. At first, it was innocent remarks about my clothes. "Sweetheart, that fabric went out of style ages ago." About my manners. "In proper society one holds the dessert spoon differently." About my speech. "Where did you pick up that provincial accent?" I tried not to pay attention, chalking up her behavior to maternal jealousy. Cullen promised she would get used to me, that she only worried about her son. In his eyes, his mother was a saintly woman who, after his father's death, had built a restaurant empire on her own and raised him single-handedly. The wedding turned into an event Stephanie organized according to her taste, lavish, expensive, and stripped of all warmth. My parents felt out of place among the wealthy guests, and my childhood friends weren't invited at all. My mother-in-law claimed people of their circle would feel uncomfortable at such an event. The first year of marriage was like a roller coaster. Cullen worked tirelessly, trying to prove to his mother that he was worthy of leading the family business. Stephanie wasn't in a hurry to hand over the reins, hinting that her boy wasn't ready yet. Especially after getting involved with a provincial girl. We lived in an apartment that Stephanie had temporarily provided for us. The temporariness dragged on, but that gift gave my mother-in-law the right to appear without warning at any time. She criticized my cooking. "Is this really food for a man?" My cleaning. "Don't you see the dust on the top shelves?" Even how I folded my husband's clothes. I tried to find common ground with her, offered to help at the restaurant, showed interest in the business, tried to get her talking about her youth. All to no avail. My mother-in-law kept her distance, making it clear I was unworthy of their family. At the same time, she skillfully manipulated her son. When I became pregnant, she put on an act of joy, but in private she said to me, "A child needs a proper mother, one who can instill good manners. I hope you understand your responsibility." At the 7th week I had a miscarriage. The doctors spoke of stress as a possible cause. When I was discharged from the hospital, Stephanie invited us to a family dinner. At a perfectly set table she raised a toast. "To the future children who will be carried by a healthy woman." Cullen stayed silent, staring into his glass. I sat there swallowing my tears along with the wine, realizing that breaking this bond between mother and son was impossible. Perhaps I should have left then. But I loved Cullen, believed our love was stronger than his mother's intrigues. I returned to work at the preschool, where I felt needed and valued, unlike in my husband's family, where I was always a stranger. On our second anniversary, Cullen gifted me a trip to Paris. For the first time in a long while, we were happy, away from his mother. He admitted he was tired of her control, that he dreamed of his own business, not a manager's spot in his mother's empire. We made plans, dreamed of the future, felt like a couple again. When we returned, Stephanie announced she had decided to hand over the management of a new restaurant she was opening in a prestigious neighborhood to her son. Cullen lit up with enthusiasm, convinced he finally had a chance to prove himself. At that moment, I believed my relationship with my mother-in-law could improve. How naive. Stephanie had simply found a new way to control her son, forcing him to work around the clock for the family business. Cullen came home past midnight, left before dawn, and we hardly saw each other. And then the pandemic began. The restaurant business was among the first to suffer. Stephanie blamed her son for the losses at the new establishment, though the real reason was the lockdown. But Cullen took the blame upon himself. He became irritable, withdrawn, and started drinking. One day, under the influence of alcohol, he confessed that he had taken out a loan trying to save the restaurant and now had no idea how to repay it. I offered to sell my jewelry, the gifts Cullen had given me over the years. That money would have been enough for the first payments. He refused, declaring, "A man must solve financial problems himself." Another phrase he had absorbed with his mother's milk. A week later, Stephanie invited us to dinner. At the table, she announced that she would generously pay off her son's loan, under one condition: he would return to work as manager of the main restaurant under her direct supervision. Cullen agreed without even asking my opinion. That evening at home, we had our first serious quarrel. I accused him of spinelessness, he accused me of not understanding. "You'll never be on her level," he threw at me in the heat of the argument. "Mom is right, you'll never understand our world." For the first time in 3 years of marriage, I packed a suitcase and went to stay with a friend. For 2 weeks we didn't speak. Cullen didn't call, didn't write. But Stephanie did call, informing me that her boy had finally opened his eyes and was now seeing a suitable girl from their circle. I returned home to collect the rest of my things. Cullen was there, gaunt, with red eyes. He begged me to forgive him, swore there was no other woman, that his mother had made it all up to drive us apart. We talked all night. He admitted that he was afraid of disappointing his mother, that he felt indebted to her, but that he loved me and didn't want to lose me. We decided to start over. Cullen promised to set boundaries in his relationship with his mother. I agreed to give our marriage another chance. We even began looking for an apartment to buy, our own home, where Stephanie could not show up uninvited. For 2 weeks everything was relatively calm. Cullen came home from work on time, we had dinner together, discussed plans for the future. My mother-in-law kept her distance, calling her son only occasionally on urgent business matters. And then disaster struck. The preschool where I worked was closed for reconstruction. We were temporarily reassigned to other institutions, but there wasn't a spot for me. The principal promised to reinstate me as soon as the school reopened 6 months, maybe even a year later. I was left without a job and without income. Cullen was earning decently, but after the loan incident our finances were far from stable. I started looking for a new job, but because of the pandemic there were few vacancies and the competition was fierce. After a week of unsuccessful searching, Stephanie called. She suggested we meet at the Aristocrat. I was surprised. She usually avoided meeting me alone without her son present. But I decided that maybe this was a chance to mend our relationship. At the restaurant, my mother-in-law greeted me in her office. She looked impeccable, as always. She offered me tea, which was unusual too. Normally she didn't waste even that courtesy on me. "Cullen told me about your difficulties at work," she began, elegantly stirring her tea with a silver spoon. I thought I could help. I tensed, expecting a catch, but tried to look grateful. "That's very kind of you, Stephanie. After all, you are my son's wife." She said it as if the fact of our marriage still baffled her, and I cannot allow a member of the Rothman family to be in a difficult position. I waited to hear what would follow. Could she be about to offer me a position at the restaurant? "We have a vacancy at the Aristocrat," Stephanie continued. "Nothing complicated, even someone with your..." Education could handle it. I felt the familiar irritation rise inside me, but I restrained myself. What kind of vacancy? Dishwasher. She uttered the word with special pleasure, watching my reaction. Temporary, of course, until something more suited to your talents comes along. The world seemed to stop. I stared at her, unable to believe my ears. A dishwasher? She was offering me, a teacher with a higher education and years of experience, the wife of her son, to wash dishes in her restaurant? I understand your confusion. Stephanie smiled her signature smile that never reached her eyes. But times are hard right now. Besides, you need something to occupy yourself with while your preschool is under renovation. Cullen is very concerned about your emotional state. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. Did you discuss this with Cullen? Of course, dear. He thinks it's an excellent temporary solution. Families should support each other in difficult times, don't you agree? I doubted Cullen would have approved such an offer. But the only way to know for sure was to ask him directly. And for that, I first needed to leave this office with dignity. I'll think about your offer, Stephanie, I said, rising. Thank you for the tea. Think it over, dear. She stood as well, making it clear the audience was over. But not too long. Positions like these are always in demand. At home, I interrogated Cullen. At first, he denied knowing anything about his mother's proposal. Then he admitted she had mentioned some kind of vacancy but hadn't revealed the details. Look, I understand it's not your dream job, he said when I told him about the dishwasher position. But it's temporary, until you find something more suitable. And the salary is steady. Do you even realize how humiliating this is? I couldn't believe his reaction. Your mother deliberately offered me the lowest job possible just to put me in my place. Don't be so dramatic, Cullen started getting irritated. Mom is trying to help. She could have offered nothing at all. It would have been better if she hadn't. I felt tears rising. This isn't help, it's just another way to humiliate me. You know what? He raised his voice. Nothing ever satisfies you. Mom gave us an apartment you weren't happy. Mom offers you a job you're not happy. Maybe the problem isn't with her, but with you? Those words hurt more than my mother-in-law's proposal. My husband, the man who was supposed to be on my side, defended his mother even when she was openly mocking me. If you think I'm ungrateful, then maybe we should reconsider our relationship, I said quietly. I can't go on living in this triangle where I'm always the extra one. Cullen immediately softened. He hugged me, started apologizing, saying he had spoken in anger, that he loved me and wanted our marriage to work. Just accept this offer for now, he pleaded. Show that you're above these games. And in the meantime, I'll look for something worthy of you. In the end, I agreed more out of financial necessity than from any desire to please my husband or my mother-in-law. We truly needed the money, and there was no other job in sight. The next day I went to the aristocrat with firm determination to do my job professionally despite the humiliation. Stephanie personally escorted me into the kitchen, introducing me to the head chef John and the rest of the staff. This is Gwen, our new helper, she said with a smile. Temporary, of course. She's my son's wife, so please treat her with understanding. From the looks in the staff's eyes, I understood that everyone grasped the subtext of the situation. The owner's son's wife washing dishes. This wasn't accidental. It was either punishment or a test of endurance. John, a heavy-set man with kind eyes and an authoritative voice, showed me my station, explained the duties, and introduced me to my partner, a middle-aged woman named Rebecca. Don't worry, girl, she whispered when we were alone. It's not as bad as it looks. I've been in this kitchen for 15 years, I've seen it all. The first day left me physically exhausted. Despite the dishwashers, much had to be done by hand, fine china, crystal glasses, antique silverware. By evening my hands, back, and legs ached. But I didn't complain, I worked silently and diligently. Stephanie came into the kitchen twice to check how I was doing. Each time she found something to nitpick, a spot on a glass, a plate not dry enough. I corrected it silently, giving her no reason for a reprimand. I dragged myself home completely drained. Cullen greeted me with a guilty look and the suggestion of ordering dinner from a restaurant, certainly not from the aristocrat. I refused, citing exhaustion, and went straight to bed. That was the start of my new life. 5 days a week I washed dishes in my mother-in-law's restaurant, came home with no strength left, and on weekends I tried to recover and search for another job. Without success. Seeing my state, Cullen brought up renting an apartment far from his mother again. I supported the idea, but we didn't have enough money for a down payment and deposit. Part of Cullen's salary went to paying off the loan his mother hadn't fully covered, and my earnings barely covered current expenses. Weeks passed. I got used to the work, even found some benefits. Physical labor gave my mind a break. The kitchen staff treated me well, especially after they realized I didn't complain or demand special treatment as the owner's relative. Rebecca became my ally and informant. From her I learned all the kitchen gossip, including what concerned my mother-in-law and her business. That's how I discovered that Stephanie's business was struggling due to the pandemic, that she was looking for investors, but negotiations were difficult. Today's an important day, Rebecca told me one morning. Investors from New York are coming. If they reach an agreement, our boss gets her funding. If not, there'll be layoffs. I nodded, not particularly interested. My mother-in-law's affairs concerned me only indirectly. Though if the restaurant closed, I would have to look for a new job. But I was already doing that anyway. All day there was tension in the kitchen. The chef personally checked every dish leaving the pass. The waiters walked on tiptoe. Even the dishes were brought in more carefully than usual. By evening the guests had arrived. They were taken to a specially prepared VIP hall. The table was set with the finest porcelain and crystal, which I polished until it gleamed. The menu was special. The chef had prepared his signature dishes. Around 9 o'clock Stephanie entered the kitchen. She looked tense, though she tried to hide it. "John, everything is going wonderfully," she told the chef. "But we have a small problem." Lisa twisted her ankle. Lisa was the head waitress serving the VIP guests. "Adrian will replace her," the chef reacted immediately. "He's experienced." "Adrian is busy with another hall right now," Stephanie pressed her lips together. "And this is a critical moment. We need to serve desserts. That's what will leave the final impression." The chef started going through options, but all the waiters were occupied. It was Friday night. The restaurant was full. Then Stephanie's gaze landed on me. I was just polishing the last glass from the set for the VIP guests. "Why not use our Gwen?" she said with a smile that promised nothing good. "She's family. She must understand the importance of the moment." I froze with the glass in my hand. The chef looked at me uncertainly. "But she's never worked in the hall." "Nothing complicated," Stephanie waved it off. "Just carry the tray with the desserts and place them in front of the guests. Even a child could manage." The chef hesitated, but didn't dare argue with the owner. "If Gwen doesn't mind." Everyone turned to me. I realized this was another trap for my mother-in-law. If I refused, I'd look bad in front of the team, who were all tense for the sake of the evening. If I agreed, I risked embarrassing myself in the hall. "I'm ready to help," I said, trying to sound confident. "What needs to be done?" "Just carry the tray with the desserts and set them gracefully in front of each guest," Stephanie explained. "Lisa will show you exactly how." I nodded, though inside everything tightened with anxiety. Waiters undergo special training, and I had never done anything like this before. What if I dropped the tray? Or mixed up who gets what? Limping, Lisa showed me the basic movements and the sequence of serving. She looked guilty. "I'm sorry this happened. That tile in the restroom is so slippery." "Don't worry," I tried to smile. "I'll manage somehow." They gave me a waitress uniform, a white blouse and a black skirt. The blouse was too big, the skirt too tight, but there was no choice. I quickly changed, pulled my hair into a bun, and returned to the kitchen, where a tray with exquisite desserts was already waiting for me. "Remember, back straight, smile reserved, movements smooth," Lisa instructed me. "And don't look guests in the eye, it's considered tactless." I nodded, trying to memorize all the instructions. The chef gave me a critical look and commanded, "It's time." With my heart pounding wildly, I took the tray and headed toward the kitchen door. At the exit, Stephanie intercepted me. "Go into the hall, country girl, let the guests laugh at you," she hissed so only I could hear. A smile of anticipation played on her face. At that moment I realized this wasn't just replacing an injured waitress. This was a planned setup. Perhaps Lisa hadn't twisted her ankle at all. Perhaps it was all staged to make me a laughingstock in front of important guests, so they could see what kind of crude provincial woman Stephanie Rothman's son had chosen as his wife. But it was too late to turn back. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and pushed open the door leading into the hall. The VIP room of the aristocrat sparkled with crystal and silver. At the large round table sat 6 people, 4 men in expensive suits and 2 elegant women. They were talking animatedly, but the conversation died down when I appeared. I felt their appraising looks. The ill-fitting uniform on me probably looked ridiculous. I knew Stephanie was counting on my awkwardness, on me blushing, getting nervous, maybe even dropping something. But years of working with children had taught me self-control. I walked slowly to the table, holding the tray steady, just as Lisa had taught me. I began placing the desserts exactly in the order I had been shown. Right side of the table, then left, ladies first, then the men. I tried to move smoothly, without abrupt gestures. And it seemed I was succeeding. At least no one laughed or made remarks. The guests simply observed as I set before them the confectioner's exquisite creations. When I finished with the last dessert, I stepped back with the empty tray, preparing to leave the hall. Then one of the men, silver-haired, with piercing blue eyes, addressed me. "Excuse me, you're not an ordinary waitress, are you?" I froze, not knowing how to respond. By protocol, I should probably just smile and walk away. But something in his gaze's kind curiosity made me answer. "No, sir. Normally I work in the kitchen." "In the kitchen?" He looked intrigued. "Are you a cook?" "No," I felt myself blushing. "I wash dishes." A murmur ran through the room. I braced myself for the mockery Stephanie had been waiting for. But instead, the man asked, "And how long have you worked here?" "About 2 months," I replied, surprised by his interest. "It's a temporary job." "And what did you do before, if you don't mind my asking?" I was completely at a loss. Why was this man questioning me? What did he want? "I was a preschool teacher," I said, "with a higher education in pedagogy. But the preschool was closed for renovation, and I'm temporarily out of work." The man exchanged a glance with the woman sitting beside him, who gave a barely noticeable nod. Then he looked back at me. "Tell me, are you familiar with Carl Orff's method of early musical development?" The question caught me off guard. Carl Orff was a German composer who had created a unique system of children's musical education. I had studied his method at university and even applied elements of it in my work. "Yes, of course," I answered, feeling more confident on familiar ground. "It's a wonderful method that allows children to develop through rhythm, movement, and improvisation. I used some of its principles in my practice." The man clearly brightened at my answer. "Is that so? And which principles exactly?" For a moment I forgot where I was and began talking about how I had adapted Orff's ideas for working with preschoolers, how I created music classes combining movement, singing, and playing simple instruments. The guests listened with interest. No one interrupted or laughed. On the contrary, some nodded, as if agreeing with my words. "Impressive," the man said when I finished. "You clearly have talent and a true vocation. It's strange to see a teacher of such level in the role of a dishwasher." I didn't know what to say. Out of the corner of my eye I noticed Stephanie entering the hall. She froze at the entrance, watching with an expression of complete bewilderment on her face. "Life sometimes takes unexpected turns," I said, trying to speak with dignity. "But I believe everything is temporary." A wise approach, the man smiled. "Allow me to introduce myself, Derek Mader, CEO of the educational holding Little Minds." And this is my colleague Torre, head of our preschool projects. I felt the ground slip from under my feet. Little Minds was the largest network in the country of private preschools and development centers for young children. Their methods were considered innovative, and working there was a dream for many teachers. Very pleased to meet you, I murmured, not knowing what else to say. Gwen Verdi. Gwen, Mater pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to me. We're just opening a new center in your city. And we need talented educators, especially with experience in the ORF method. Call me tomorrow, and we'll discuss possible cooperation. I took the card with trembling fingers, still unable to believe what was happening. Thank you. I will definitely call. At that moment, Stephanie approached the table quickly. A professional smile was frozen on her face, but her eyes shot lightning. Derek, I see you've met my daughter-in-law, she said, as if it had all been part of her plan. Gwen really is a wonderful teacher. I've long been advising her to return to the profession. Mater looked at her with mild surprise. Your daughter-in-law? I didn't know you had a son of that age. Cullen, my only son, Stephanie placed her hand on my shoulder, squeezing it almost painfully. He and Gwen have been married for 3 years. Is that so? Mater shifted his gaze from her to me. And meanwhile your daughter-in-law is working for you as a dishwasher? An awkward silence fell over the room. I could physically feel Stephanie tense. Her fingers on my shoulder tightened even more. It's a temporary measure, she said with a strained smile. In our family, we make it a rule to help each other in difficult times. Isn't that right, Gwen? I looked her straight in the eyes. Of course, Stephanie. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to wash dishes in your restaurant. It's been an invaluable experience. From Mater's eyes, I understood that he clearly read the subtext of the situation. He exchanged a brief glance with Torre, who gave a barely perceptible nod. Well then, I won't keep you from your work any longer, Gwen, he said. But I'm serious about that call. I'll be expecting it tomorrow before noon. I nodded, realizing this was my chance to break free from the humiliating situation I had ended up in. I'll definitely call. Thank you for the trust. I turned to leave, but Mater stopped me. And Gwen. Thank you for the excellent service. You managed perfectly, and then something happened that no one expected. Mater began to applaud. Torre joined him, then the other guests. Within seconds, the entire VIP room was applauding me, the dishwasher who had, for a few minutes, been a waitress and then spoken about the ORF teaching method. I stood there, not knowing how to react, feeling my cheeks burn. These were not mocking claps, the kind Stephanie had anticipated. This was genuine recognition. Thank you, I murmured. Have a pleasant evening. And I hurried out of the hall, feeling my mother-in-law's scorching gaze on my back. I knew that after this episode our relationship would become even worse, if that was even possible. But at that moment, I didn't care. In the kitchen, I was met with curious looks from the staff. Everyone had heard the applause and wondered what had happened in the hall. Everything all right? The chef asked, glancing at the card in my hand. Did you manage? Yes, John, I couldn't suppress a smile. Even better than expected. I didn't go into details. I just returned to my station and continued polishing glasses, though my hands were still trembling from the excitement I had just gone through. A little later, Stephanie burst into the kitchen. Her face was white with rage. She came right up to me and hissed through her teeth. What did you do? How dare you? I only answered a guest's questions, I said calmly. As any good employee should. You deliberately wormed your way into his trust, she nearly spat. Played this little act with your teaching degree. But I really am a teacher, Stephanie, I looked her straight in the eye. You know that. You just preferred to see me as a country girl unworthy of your son. She opened her mouth to say something, but at that moment Mater entered the kitchen. He looked slightly embarrassed to find us in such a tense scene. My apologies for intruding, he said. I just wanted to personally thank the chef for a magnificent dinner. John broke into a broad smile and stepped forward to shake the important guest's hand. Stephanie transformed instantly. The smile switched on as if by a button. "Derek, how kind of you," she sang. "John truly is our treasure." While they exchanged pleasantries, I quietly stepped aside and went back to work. But when Mater finished speaking with the chef, he came over to me. "Thank you again, Gwen," he said. "And don't forget to call tomorrow. I'm serious about the job." "I will call," I smiled gratefully. "Thank you for the opportunity." When he left, Stephanie turned back to me. Her eyes narrowed. "Don't think this changes anything. Mater is just being polite. Tomorrow he won't even remember your name." "Maybe," I shrugged. "But I'll call anyway." She snorted and left, and I was left with the feeling that the battle had been won, but the war was far from over. After the restaurant closed, I returned home. Cullen was already asleep. In recent times he had been going to bed early and getting up late, as if avoiding talking to me. I didn't wake him. I took a shower, washing away the smells of the kitchen, and went to bed, clutching Mater's business card tightly in my hand. In the morning I woke with a clear head and a firm decision. I would call Mater, whatever came of it. After all, things could hardly get worse. Cullen was still asleep while I made breakfast. The business card lay on the table, and I kept glancing at it, mentally rehearsing the conversation. What would I say? How would I introduce myself? Would he think my story too strange? I was so deep in thought that I didn't notice Cullen coming into the kitchen. He looked rumpled and unrest. "Good morning," he said with a yawn. "Something happened? You look kind of nervous." I looked at him, debating whether to tell him about yesterday. On one hand, it concerned him too. On the other, he had been taking his mother's side more and more often lately. "Something strange happened at the restaurant yesterday," I began cautiously. "Your mother asked me to replace the waitress and bring desserts to the VIP guests." Cullen raised his eyebrows. "You? But you've never worked in the dining hall." "Exactly," I said with a bitter smile. I think she expected me to embarrass myself. She even told me before I went out, "Go on, country girl, let the guests laugh at you." Cullen's face darkened. "That can't be. You must have misunderstood." I understood perfectly well. My voice grew sharper. But it didn't turn out the way she planned. One of the guests was interested in my education, and when he found out I was a teacher, we started talking about the Orff method. It turned out he's the director of Little Minds. Little Minds? Cullen frowned. "That preschool network?" "Yes," I nodded. "And he offered me a job. Here's his card." I handed the card to my husband. He looked at it with suspicion. "Seriously?" he asked. "He really offered you a job just like that, in a restaurant?" "Not just like that." I was starting to get irritated. "We talked about education, about teaching methods. He valued my knowledge and experience. And yes, he told me to call today to discuss possible cooperation." Cullen looked bewildered, as if he didn't know how to react. "And you're going to call?" "Of course I'll call," I exclaimed. "This is a chance to return to normal work, to the profession I love. Aren't you happy for me?" He hesitated, rubbing his chin. "Of course I'm happy. It's just all so unexpected. And Mom, does she know?" "Oh, she knows," I laughed without mirth. She was furious. "But it's not her business, Cullen. This is my career, my life." "Of course," he nodded quickly. "You're right. It's just I don't want there to be new conflicts." I looked at my husband intently. "You're afraid your mother will be displeased if I leave the restaurant? Or that she'll think I deliberately wormed my way into Mater's trust?" Cullen looked away, and that said more than any words. He really was afraid of his mother's reaction. Even now, when it was about my professional future, he was thinking of her feelings, not mine. "You know what," I said, taking the card back from his hands, "I'm calling Mater. And if he truly offers me a job, I'll take it. And that's not up for discussion." Cullen sighed but didn't argue. He only nodded and poured himself coffee, avoiding my gaze. After breakfast, I locked myself in the bedroom and dialed the number on the card. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid I wouldn't be able to speak. But when Mater answered, my voice came out surprisingly calm. "Derek. This is Gwen Verdi from The Aristocrat. We spoke yesterday." "Gwen. I'm glad you called. I was just talking about you with Torre. We were both impressed by your knowledge and your approach to working with children." "Thank you." I felt my cheeks flush. "That's very kind to hear." "I don't like beating around the bush," Mater continued. "So I'll say it straight. We're opening a new development center in your city next month. And we need a head of the music department. Someone who understands the value of the ORF method and knows how to work with children. From our conversation, you seem like the perfect fit." I felt my breath catch. "Head of a department? But you don't really know me." "I trust my instincts." There was a smile in his voice. "Besides, Torre already checked your resume in the educator database. You took part in the Educator of the Year contest 2 years ago, right? And you placed second in the city." Yes, I was surprised at his knowledge. "But still, that's a lot of responsibility." "Of course," he agreed. "That's why I suggest we meet in person to discuss details. Perhaps today at 2 p.m.? Our office is in the Mercury Plaza Business Center. Do you know it?" "Yes, of course. I knew the building. It was one of the most prestigious in the city." "I'll be there." "Excellent," Mater sounded pleased. "And, Gwen, don't worry about yesterday's incident. I've known Stephanie a long time. We'd been negotiating possible investments in her business. But after yesterday, let's just say I've reconsidered my attitude toward that project." I didn't know what to say. Could it be that because of me my mother-in-law had lost an important investor? That would make our relationship even worse, if such a thing was possible. "I never meant to cause problems," I said honestly. "It just happened that way." "You didn't cause problems," Mater assured me. "You simply revealed some people's true face. And for that, I thank you. See you at 2 o'clock, Gwen." "See you then, Derek. Thank you for your trust." I hung up, feeling a mix of joy, anxiety, and disbelief. Could this really be happening? Could one chance conversation in a restaurant change my fate so completely? When I came out of the bedroom, Cullen was sitting in the living room, staring at his phone. Seeing me, he put the device aside and looked at me questioningly. "Well? I have an interview today at 2, I said, still struggling to believe it was real. "Mater is offering me the position of head of music at the new Little Mind Center." Cullen whistled softly. "Seriously? That's prestigious, right?" "Very," I couldn't hold back a smile. "Little Minds is the best private preschool network in the country. Working there is a dream for many teachers." "And the pay is good?" That question was so typical of Cullen. Always practical, always thinking about money. "I think so," I shrugged. "But it's not just about the money. It's a chance to do what I love, to grow professionally. Do you understand?" He nodded, though I wasn't sure he really did. Lately, we understood each other less and less. "And what about Mom?" he asked, and I sighed inwardly. Of course he was thinking about her. "Will you tell her you're leaving the restaurant?" "If I get the job, yes, I'll tell her," I answered firmly. "But not before. I don't want her interfering." Cullen frowned. "You think she'd interfere? Do you doubt it?" I looked at him with disbelief. "After everything? After she deliberately put me on dishwashing duty to humiliate me? After yesterday's attempt to make me look like a fool in front of important guests?" He was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "I don't think she wanted to humiliate you. It's just she has her own idea of what her son's wife should be, and those ideas don't include a provincial girl without connections or money," I finished for him. "I know, Cullen. She's never hidden her attitude toward me. She just wants what's best for me," he said it as if repeating a memorized phrase. She's done so much for me, sacrificed so much. I know, I cut him off. You've said it 1,000 times. But that doesn't give her the right to decide who you live with and who you love. You're a grown man, Cullen. It's time you started making your own decisions. He sighed but said nothing. We both knew it was the same old argument, one that never led anywhere productive. I'm going to get ready for the interview, I said, changing the subject. I need to choose what to wear, prepare my resume. Of course, he nodded. I'll go too. Mom asked me to stop by the restaurant to help with some documents. I gave a short laugh but didn't comment. Of course, Stephanie had already summoned her son. No doubt she wanted to discuss yesterday's incident, maybe even turn him against my potential new job. But I didn't have the energy to worry about that now. I had an important interview ahead, and I needed to focus on it. Cullen left, and I plunged into preparation. I pulled out my only business dress, dark blue, strict but elegant. I updated my resume, gathered my diplomas and certificates. I reviewed recent articles on the ORF method, refreshing my knowledge. Time flew, and soon I was standing before the mirror, evaluating my appearance. The dress fit well, my hair was styled neatly, my makeup was discreet but highlighted my eyes. I looked professional, exactly as someone should who was applying for a serious position. I arrived at the Mercury Plaza Business Center 15 minutes before the scheduled time. The security guard at the entrance checked my ID, compared it with the visitor list, and handed me a pass. 15th floor, office 1502, he said. Riding up in the elevator, I felt my anxiety grow. What if Mater had just been polite? What if the interview was a mere formality, and the position was already filled? What if I wasn't what they were looking for? But when the elevator doors opened on the 15th floor, I took a deep breath and pushed the doubts away. I was a professional. I had knowledge, experience, and a genuine love for children. If Little Minds was looking for a good teacher, I was exactly the person they needed. Office 1502 welcomed me with modern decor and a friendly receptionist. Gwen Verdi, she smiled. Derek is expecting you. Please, go in. Mater greeted me in a spacious office with panoramic windows. Next to him sat Torre, the same woman from the restaurant. Gwen, Mater rose to meet me. Glad to see you. Please, have a seat. I sat down in the offered chair, trying to look confident, though inside everything was trembling with nerves. So, Mater began, as I mentioned on the phone, we're opening a new center in your city. It won't just be a preschool, but a full educational complex for children from 1 to 7 years old. And one of the key areas is musical development. I nodded, listening attentively. We've long used elements of the ORF method in our programs, he continued. But now we want to expand this direction, make it more structured and in-depth. And we need someone to lead this process, to develop programs, train teachers, and hold open classes for parents. That sounds very interesting, I said sincerely. I've always believed that musical development is one of the key elements of a child's harmonious growth. Exactly, Mater smiled. Torre studied your resume and was impressed by your experience. Torre nodded. What especially interested me was your work integrating music into other educational areas, math, speech development, socialization. That's exactly what we want to expand in our center. The next hour passed in a detailed discussion of my experience, teaching methods, and my vision for developing the music program. I spoke about my achievements, how I had designed curricula for preschool, how I adapted complex concepts to be understandable for young children. Mater and Torre asked questions, sometimes debating details with each other. Gradually, I relaxed. It wasn't an interrogation or an exam, it felt more like a professional discussion among colleagues. And, surprisingly, they truly listened to my opinion, took notes on my ideas, nodded, agreeing with my arguments. You know, Gwen, Mater said when we had finished the discussion, I am completely convinced that you are exactly the person we need. Torre agrees with me, don't you? She nodded. Absolutely. Your approach fully matches the philosophy of Little Minds. So, Mater leaned forward, we are offering you the position of head of music development in the new center. A 3-year contract with the possibility of extension. The salary. He named a figure 3 times higher than what I had earned at the preschool, not to mention as a dishwasher. I felt my head spin. That is a very generous offer. We value professionals, Mater replied simply. And we believe that fair pay is recognition of a person's worth as a specialist. Besides, the work won't be easy. You'll have to not only work with children, but also develop teaching materials, train staff, and engage with parents. I understand, I nodded. And I'm ready for these challenges. Excellent. Mater smiled. Then all that's left is to go over some formalities. When could you start? I thought for a moment. I would need to give notice at the restaurant, though it was unlikely Stephanie would insist on me working it out. More likely, she would throw me out the instant she found out. I think in 2 weeks, I said. I want to finish things properly at my previous job. Reasonable, Mater agreed. The center officially opens in a month, so you'll have time to meet the team and get to know our specifics. We discussed a few more details, after which Mater handed me a draft employment contract. Look it over, suggest changes if you have any, he said. We are open to dialogue. When I left the business center, it was already growing dark. I walked through the evening city, clutching the folder with the contract to my chest, unable to believe my luck. Could this really be happening? Could one chance meeting at a restaurant have changed my life so drastically? I didn't go home right away. I stopped at a small cafe, ordered tea, and read through the documents again. The contract was solid, with clearly defined responsibilities and rights, benefits, opportunities for professional growth. This wasn't just a job, it was a career, the one I had dreamed of. I got home around 8 in the evening. Cullen still wasn't there, probably still helping with paperwork at his mother's restaurant. I showered, changed into something comfortable, and made dinner, humming with happiness. Cullen came home around 10, just as I was starting to worry. He looked tired and somehow lost. How was the interview? He asked without looking me in the eye. Wonderful. I couldn't hold back my smile. They offered me the job. Head of music development, just as promised. With excellent pay and opportunities for growth. Congratulations, he said without enthusiasm. I'm happy for you. I steadied my husband carefully. What's wrong, Cullen? You look upset. Is it because of my new job? He sighed, collapsing onto the couch. Not only that. Mom is furious. Mater pulled out of investing in her business. Said he had reconsidered his priorities. Right after yesterday's dinner and your interview today. I felt my heart clench. I'm sorry it turned out that way. But I never asked him to walk away from the deal. I know, Cullen rubbed his face with his hands. But Mom thinks you charmed Mater on purpose to spite her. That you destroyed a deal she had been working on for months. That's absurd. I exclaimed. I didn't even know who Mater was until he spoke to me at the restaurant. And I certainly didn't ask him to cancel any deals with your mother. I know, Cullen repeated. But you know how Mom is. She always looks for hidden motives and conspiracies. And now what? I asked, feeling irritation rise. Am I supposed to give up my dream job because your mother thinks I'm plotting against her? No, of course not. He raised his hands in a placating gesture. Just be prepared for her to be furious. Especially when she finds out you're leaving the restaurant. I'm always prepared for her fury, I said bitterly. For 3 years of marriage, that's all I've seen. Her displeasure, her contempt, her attempts to humiliate me. Do you know what she said to me yesterday before I went into the hall? Go on, country girl, let the guests laugh at you. That's your mother, Cullen. The woman you keep defending. He looked ashamed. I didn't know. She couldn't have said that. She could, and she did. I was unyielding. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. You simply don't want to see her for who she really is. You only see the image of the perfect mother you've created for yourself. Cullen stayed silent, staring at the floor. I knew he wouldn't believe me. He never did when it came to his mother. To him, she was a saintly woman who had sacrificed everything for her son. And no facts could shatter that image. I'm leaving the restaurant, I said firmly. Tomorrow I'll submit my resignation. And in 2 weeks I'll start at Little Mines. If your mother can't accept that those are her problems, not mine. And what if she refuses to accept your resignation? Cullen asked. If she makes you work out a longer notice period so you miss the start at your new job? I looked at him in surprise. You really think she's capable of such pettiness? He didn't answer, but his look said everything. Yes, she was capable of that. And of far worse. Then I'll just leave, I said firmly. No notice, no waiting. Let her sue me if she wants. But I won't let her destroy my chance at a normal life and career. Cullen sighed. I'll talk to her. I'll try to explain the situation. Maybe she'll understand. I gave him a skeptical look. Stephanie had never understood anything when it came to me. To her I was always the enemy, an outsider who had stolen her son. No conversation could change that. Do whatever you think is best, I said wearily. But I'm leaving the restaurant and starting my new job anyway. And that's not up for discussion. Cullen nodded without looking at me. We ate dinner in tense silence, each lost in our own thoughts. I was thinking about my new job, the opportunities it opened. Cullen, most likely, about how to explain my decision to his mother without provoking her fury. After dinner I showed him the contract, explained the terms, told him about the plans. He listened, nodded, asked the right questions, but I felt his mind was elsewhere. Probably with his mother, who was now mourning the collapse of her deal with Mater. The next morning began with a phone call. It was Rebecca, my partner in the restaurant. Gwen, are you coming to work today? She asked without preamble. Of course, I said, surprised. Why? It's chaos here, she lowered her voice to a whisper. Stephanie is screaming at everyone, the staff is scattering. Word is some big deal fell through, and she's blaming you. I sighed. So the rumors had already started. I have nothing to do with her deals, Rebecca. It's just a coincidence. Well, you don't have to tell me that, she snorted. I've known that woman 20 years. She always looks for someone else to blame, never herself. But be careful today. She's clearly in a fighting mood. Thanks for the warning, I said sincerely. I'll be on guard. After the call I thought for a long time about whether I should even go to the restaurant today. Maybe call in sick? Or just call and quit right away? But that would look like weakness. And I had decided I wouldn't be weak anymore, wouldn't bend under Stephanie and her manipulations. I arrived at the restaurant as usual, at the start of my shift. The atmosphere in the kitchen was heavy. The staff whispered among themselves, throwing me curious glances. Rebecca met me with worry in her eyes. She's already asked about you, she whispered. Said you're to come to her office the moment you arrive. I nodded, feeling my pulse quicken. Thanks. I'll change and go to her. After putting on my uniform, I headed to Stephanie's office. On the way I ran into the chef, who gave me an approving nod. Hang in there, girl. You're right to be looking for something better. So the rumors about my new job had spread too. No surprise, news in the restaurant business travels faster than the wind. I knocked on the office door, and after hearing a clerk come in, stepped inside. Stephanie sat at her desk, looking through some documents. She didn't even raise her head when I entered. You wanted to see me, Stephanie? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She slowly lifted her gaze. Her eyes were cold as ice. Ah, Gwen. Yes, I wanted to talk to you. I waited in silence. I've heard rumors, she began, choosing her words carefully, that you received some kind of offer from Derek Mater. Is that true? Yes, I saw no reason to deny the obvious. I had an interview yesterday. I was offered the position of head of music development at the new Little Mines Center. She studied me for a long time, as if trying to find something in my face that wasn't there. And of course, you accepted? Yes, I nodded. It's a wonderful opportunity to return to my profession, to work I love. How convenient, she curled her lips. Mater pulls out of investing in my business and immediately offers a job to my daughter-in-law. What a coincidence. It really is a coincidence, I said firmly. I didn't ask him to reject the deal with you. And I knew nothing of your negotiations until last night, when Cullen told me. But of course, you told Mater all about how horribly I treat you, her voice dripped with venom. About how I make you wash dishes. About how I humiliate you at every opportunity. No, I shook my head. We spoke only about work. About education, about early development methods. About my experience and future plans. And you expect me to believe that, she laughed, but there was no humor in it. I don't care if you believe me or not, I was beginning to lose patience. The fact is, I received a job offer, and I'm accepting it. That's why I came here to tell you that I'm resigning from the restaurant in 2 weeks. Stephanie leaned back in her chair, giving me a long, measuring look. 2 weeks? You think I'll let you walk away so easily? After what you've done? And what exactly have I done? I raised an eyebrow. Done my job well? Spoken professionally with guests? Or do you mean the fact that I didn't humiliate myself in the hall, as you expected, when you told me, go on, country girl, let the guests laugh at you? Her eyes narrowed. You're crossing boundaries, Gwen. No, Stephanie, I shook my head. You crossed every boundary long ago. For 3 years you've tried to destroy me, humiliate me, break me. For 3 years I endured your mockery, your contempt, your petty tyranny. But that ends now. I am no longer your daughter-in-law dishwasher. I am a professional who has found a worthy use for her talents. And if you can't accept it, then that's your problem, not mine. She looked at me with a mix of shock and fury. Probably no one had ever spoken to her in that tone before. Especially not me, the quiet, compliant Gwen, who had always silently endured every insult. You'll regret this, she said softly, almost in a whisper. I swear, you'll bitterly regret your words. Maybe, I shrugged. But right now, all I feel is relief. Relief that I finally said what I've long wanted to say. And relief that soon I'll be free from your control and manipulation. I placed the resignation letter I had prepared on her desk. Here is my notice. By law, I'm required to work 2 more weeks, but if you'd prefer I leave immediately, I won't object. Stephanie picked up the letter with 2 fingers, as if it were something foul. I'll consider it and give you my answer. Now go back to work. Your shift isn't over yet. I nodded and walked out of her office with the sense that I had just crossed an important threshold. For the first time in 3 years, I had openly stood up to Stephanie, told her to her face everything I thought about her behavior. And though I knew the payback might be harsh, I felt astonishingly light. In the kitchen, I was met by questioning looks from my colleagues. It's all right, I said, taking my place at the sink. I handed in my resignation. Rebecca let out a sigh of relief. Thank God. I was afraid she'd eat you alive. Almost, I smiled faintly. But I held my ground. The day passed in tense silence. Stephanie never appeared in the kitchen again, which was unusual. Normally she would drop by several times a shift to check on the staff. But today it was as if she was avoiding any place where she might encounter me. After work I went home, feeling a strange mix of triumph and unease. I had won this round, but the war was only beginning. Stephanie wasn't the type to accept defeat easily. She was surely already planning her counterattack. Cullen wasn't home, though it was late evening. I called him, but his phone was out of range. That was unusual. Cullen was always reachable, especially lately, when our relationship had become so strained. It was nearly midnight when I finally heard the sound of a key in the lock. Cullen came in looking worn and battered. He smelled faintly of alcohol, a rarity, since he hardly drank. Where were you? I asked, not hiding my worry. With Mom, he said, sinking heavily onto the couch. She's in a terrible state. The deal with Mater has completely collapsed, and without his investment the restaurant may not survive the next quarter. I felt a pang of guilt, though rationally I knew I wasn't responsible for Stephanie's problems. I'm sorry it turned out that way. But I had nothing to do with their business decisions. I know, he sighed. But the situation still looks strange. You talk to Mater in the restaurant, he offers you a job, and he turns his back on Mom. As if he's choosing sides in your conflict. Maybe that's exactly what it is. I sat down beside him. Maybe he saw how she treats me, how she treats her employees, and decided he doesn't want to deal with her. Cullen frowned. What do you mean? I mean your mother is a tyrant, Cullen, I said plainly. She humiliates her staff, manipulates people, treats everyone with contempt. Maybe Mater just saw her true nature and decided he wanted no part of it. Don't talk about her like that, Cullen raised his voice. You don't know what she went through to build this business. I only know what I see, I replied calmly. And what I see is a woman who uses her power to hurt others. Who tries to control everyone around her, including her grown son. Who cannot accept that people have the right to their own choices. Cullen stood up unsteadily. I won't listen to this. My mother is a strong woman who fought her whole life to give me the best. She deserves respect, not criticism. Even when she's wrong? I stood too. Even when she deliberately tries to humiliate your wife in front of important guests? Even when she puts someone with a university degree at the sink just to flaunt her power? She gave you a job when you needed one. Cullen shouted. And the first chance you got, you betrayed her by running to Mater. Betrayed? I couldn't believe my ears. Seriously, Cullen? I betrayed the woman who spent 3 years trying to destroy our marriage. Who treated me like dirt? Who actually celebrated my miscarriage because she didn't want grandchildren from a country girl? He recoiled as if I had struck him. What are you saying? Mom never celebrated your miscarriage. She was as upset as we were. She raised a toast to future children who would be carried by a healthy woman. I was almost screaming. That very same day I came home from the hospital. And you sat right there, Cullen. You heard it all and stayed silent. He shook his head as if to chase away the memory. You misunderstood. She meant something else. Of course, I said bitterly. She always means something else. And I'm always the one who misunderstands. You know what, Cullen? I'm done with this. I'm done being the target in your dysfunctional family. I'm done with you always choosing your mother's side, even when she's blatantly wrong. I'm not taking anyone's side, he raised his voice. I'm just trying to understand what's happening. My wife suddenly gets a job from the man who drops my mother's deal. It looks suspicious, Gwen. You know what's truly suspicious? I looked him straight in the eyes. That your first thought is that I somehow manipulated Mater. Not that I could have gotten the job through my professional skills. Not that I could have impressed him with my knowledge and experience. No, of course not. I must have tricked him, schemed somehow. Because country girl Gwen could never possibly be good enough for a job like this, right? Cullen looked ashamed. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. I shook my head. You're just like your mother, Cullen. You never saw me as your equal either. You always thought I should be grateful that you, so successful, from such a good family, stooped to marry a girl from the provinces. That's not true. He looked genuinely hurt. I loved you. I still do. Love isn't just words, Cullen. It's actions. It's the choices we make every day. And every day you choose your mother over me. Even now, when we finally have a chance at a new life, you're with her, comforting her, listening to her accusations against me. He looked at me silently, as if truly seeing me for the first time. Maybe that was exactly what was happening. Maybe only now, when I had finally voiced everything that had built up over the years, did he understand how deep the gulf between us really was. I don't know what to say, he finally forced out. Everything's such a mess. Yes, I sighed. It is a mess. I'm not sure we'll ever untangle it. We stood in silence, staring at each other. Two people who had once loved each other, now almost strangers. What now? Cullen asked quietly. Are you going to leave? I hesitated. That question had been circling in my mind all day. Was this marriage worth continuing? Did we even have a future when Stephanie would always be standing between us? I don't know, I answered honestly. I need time to think. And so do you. He nodded in agreement. Maybe I should stay with Mom for a while, so we both can sort out our feelings? It was a reasonable suggestion. Distance could help us see the situation more clearly, understand what we truly wanted. Yes, I agreed. I think that's a good idea. Cullen started packing his things, while I sat in the kitchen, trying to process what was happening. We had never separated before, not even temporarily. This was a serious step, one that could lead either to reconciliation or to a final break. When he left, we hugged awkwardly, like acquaintances rather than spouses. I'll call, he said, and I nodded, not trusting my voice. After he was gone, I sat in the silence of the apartment for a long time, thinking about how we had gotten here. How we had gone from a loving couple to almost enemies. And much of the blame lay with Stephanie, who from the very beginning had done everything possible to destroy our marriage. But some of it was Cullen's too. He had been unable, or unwilling, to protect our relationship from his mother's interference. And some of it was mine, for staying silent too long, for enduring, for bending, afraid of losing my husband's love. Maybe this separation was inevitable. Maybe we had to go through it to finally understand what truly mattered. The next 2 weeks passed in a fog. I kept working at the restaurant, where Stephanie demonstratively ignored me, not even sparing me a glance. The staff treated me with a mix of respect and pity. Everyone knew about my quarrel with the owner and about my upcoming resignation. Cullen called every evening, but our conversations were short and shallow. We both avoided serious topics, as if afraid that one careless word could finally destroy the fragile bridge between us. 3 days before the end of my notice period at the restaurant and the start of my new job at _Little Minds _, the very thing I feared most happened. Stephanie summoned me to her office. You probably think you've won, she said without preamble as I entered. That you've landed your dream job and now you can look down on me? I waited in silence. But you don't understand what you've gotten yourself into, she smiled, and that smile frightened me more than any threat. Mater is using you to get back at me. The moment it stops amusing him, he'll toss you aside like a worthless rag. You're wrong, I said calmly. Derek offered me the job because he valued my professional skills. It has nothing to do with you. Of course, she laughed. He just happened to stumble across an educational genius washing dishes in my restaurant. What a coincidence. I didn't answer. Arguing with her was pointless. She only ever saw what she wanted to see. You know what's funniest, she continued. Cullen told me you two split up. Temporarily, of course, but still. And just one day after you got the job. Another coincidence? I felt my heart clench. So Cullen had told his mother about our problems. Of course he always told her everything. My relationship with Cullen is our private matter, I said, forcing my voice to stay firm. It has nothing to do with you or my new job. But it does, Stephanie leaned forward. Because Cullen is my son. And I will not allow some upstart from the provinces to use him and then throw him away when something better comes along. I never used Cullen, I protested. And I haven't thrown him away. We just took a break to sort out our feelings. Of course, she nodded with exaggerated understanding. And that break just happened to coincide with your career leap. You've always been ambitious, Gwen. Always wanted more than you could get. What do you want from me, Stephanie? I was beginning to lose patience. Why did you call me here? Just to insult me again? She leaned back in her chair, eyeing me with a cold smirk. I want you to understand one simple thing. You can take that job with Mater, you can even succeed in it. But you will never have my son. Because Cullen will always choose family over you. I looked at her, realizing that she truly believed what she was saying. To her, this wasn't manipulation or an attempt to hurt me, it was a simple statement of fact. She truly believed her son would never choose me over her. And the worst part was, I was starting to think she might be right. And if that's all you wanted to say, I stood up, then I'll get back to work. I still have a lot of dishes to wash. I left her office with my head held high, though inside I was trembling. Stephanie's words had cut deep because there was truth in them. Cullen really had always chosen his mother. Always taken her side, even when she was blatantly wrong. And that pattern of behavior wasn't likely to change, even if we reconciled. That same evening Cullen came by our apartment to pick up more of his things. We met in the hallway, and an awkward pause hung between us. "How are you?" he asked, avoiding my eyes. "Fine," I shrugged. "And you?" "Fine too." We stood there, not knowing what to say to each other. Two people who had once sworn eternal love, now reduced to polite strangers. "Your mother called me in today," I finally said. "She told me you told her about our break." Cullen sighed. "I'm sorry." She noticed I was living with her and started asking questions. "You know how she is at getting information out of people." "I know," I nodded. "It's just, I hoped it would stay between us. At least for a while." "I'm sorry," he looked guilty. "I shouldn't have told her." We fell silent again. I looked at my husband, his gaunt face, lifeless eyes, slumped shoulders. He looked as though he was carrying an unbearable weight. And suddenly I realized that part of that weight was me. My new job, my battle with his mother, my demands that he choose sides. "Cullen," I said more gently, "I don't want you to suffer. I don't want to force you to choose between me and your mother. That's not fair to you." He lifted his eyes in surprise. "What are you saying?" "I think maybe we should consider divorce." The words were hard to say, but I felt I had to speak them. To stop tormenting each other, to stop trying to change what can't be changed. He turned pale. You want a divorce?" "I don't know what I want," I answered honestly. "I just see that we're both unhappy. That we're dragging each other down instead of supporting one another. And maybe the most honest decision is to let each other go." Cullen was silent for a long time, staring at the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat. "Maybe you're right. Maybe we're just incompatible." His words cut deep, even though I was the one who had suggested separating. Deep inside, I still hoped he would fight for our marriage, that he would say he loved me more than anything, that he was ready to stand up to his mother for the sake of our happiness. But he didn't say it. And that was the answer to all the unasked questions. "I'll talk to a lawyer," he said after a pause. "Prepare the papers. It'll all be civilized, I promise." "Thank you," I nodded, feeling tears sting my eyes. "I appreciate that." He gathered the things he had come for and left without looking back. And I stood in the empty apartment, realizing that an important chapter of my life had just ended. And though it hurt, there was also a strange lightness. As if the heavy burden I had been carrying for years had finally slipped from my shoulders. On my last day at the restaurant, I came to collect my work record and final paycheck. Stephanie called me into her office, where the accountant was already waiting with the documents. "Everything's ready," she said curtly. "Sign and go." I checked the amounts, signed where necessary, and received my work record with an entry about my job as a dishwasher at _the aristocrat _. It would look odd in the career of a teacher, but I wasn't ashamed of it. It was a stage I had to go through. A stage that had taught me a lot. "Well," Stephanie said after the accountant left us alone, "I suppose this is our last meeting. Cullen told me about your decision to divorce." I nodded, not surprised she knew. Of course, Cullen had told her first. "I hope you realize you're hurting him," she continued. "He really did love you. Despite all your shortcomings. I loved him too," I said softly. "But sometimes love isn't enough. Especially when there's always a third person standing between a husband and wife." She raised an eyebrow. "You're blaming me for your divorce?" "No," I shook my head. "I blame all of us. You for not being able to let go of your son. Cullen for not being able to make a choice. And myself for letting it go on for too long. Stephanie studied me for a long time, as if seeing me for the first time. You know, Gwen, maybe I underestimated you all these years. You turned out stronger than I thought. It was the closest thing to a compliment I had ever heard from her. And at another time, I might have been touched. But now, it no longer mattered. Goodbye, Stephanie, I stood up to leave. I wish you find a daughter-in-law who meets your expectations. Goodbye, Gwen, she nodded. And good luck at your new job. In spite of everything, I think you'll do well. I left her office, then the restaurant, feeling an odd calm. It wasn't just a job that had ended, it was a whole chapter of life, one filled with struggle, humiliation, and the constant need to prove my worth to people who never intended to recognize it. Ahead lay a new life. A new job, where my knowledge and experience were valued. Perhaps new relationships someday with someone who would see me as an equal, not a project to be fixed or an object to be controlled. For now, I simply walked down the street, enjoying the warm spring day and the sense of freedom I hadn't felt in a very long time. 3 days later I started work at _Little Minds _. I was welcomed warmly and respectfully. Torre personally introduced me to the staff, showed me the facilities, explained the principles of their work. I listened, looking around at the bright, spacious classrooms with modern equipment, the playgrounds in the yard, hardly able to believe I would be working in such a wonderful place. You'll have your own office, Torre said, opening the door to a small but cozy room with a window overlooking the yard. Here you can work on programs, hold individual lessons, meet with parents. I stepped inside, hardly believing my eyes. On the desk stood a new computer, shelves lined the walls for books and teaching materials, and in the corner stood a piano. It was nothing like the cramped kitchen of the restaurant where I had spent my days washing dishes. Thank you, I said, feeling a lump rise in my throat. This is wonderful. You deserve it, Gwen, Torre smiled. Derek is very impressed with your professionalism. And so am I. We're certain we made the right choice. That day I came home overflowing with impressions and ideas. For the first time in a long while, I felt in my place. Not an outsider, not an extra, not someone merely tolerated out of pity. But a valued employee, whose knowledge and experience were recognized and respected. Cullen filed the divorce papers a week later, just as he had promised. Everything was civilized. We divided the property without disputes. I kept only my personal belongings and a small sum of money to get by at first. The apartment, the car, everything acquired during the marriage went to him. None of that mattered to me. I was starting a new life and didn't want to drag into it material reminders of the past. I rented a small but cozy apartment not far from the Little Minds center. My salary was enough to cover rent and live comfortably. For the first time in a long time, I was financially independent, and that feeling was intoxicating. Work consumed me completely. I developed programs for musical development, held classes with children, trained other teachers in the basics of the ORF method. The children loved my lessons, parents noted their progress, colleagues respected my opinion. I blossomed like a flower long deprived of sunlight and suddenly receiving it in abundance. One day, about a month after I started at Little Minds I ran into Mater in the hallway. He stopped, looking at me with a satisfied smile. Gwen, how are you? How's the work going? Wonderful, Derek, I smiled back sincerely. Every day I thank fate that it brought us together in that restaurant. So do I, he nodded. You know, I wasn't completely honest with you back then. I already knew who you were before you came out with that tray. I looked at him in surprise. What do you mean? I had been following your career since the Educator of the Year competition, he admitted. Your work in musical development made a strong impression on me. I even wanted to offer you a job then, but you were married to the son of Stephanie Rothman, with whom we were negotiating a partnership. That would have been unethical. I listened, stunned. So it hadn't been a coincidence? He knew who I was even before we met at the restaurant? But when I saw how she treated you," Mater continued, "how she tried to humiliate you in front of everyone, I realized I didn't want to deal with a person like that. And that you deserved better than washing dishes in her restaurant. So you deliberately started talking to me about the ORF method, knowing I knew it?" "Yes," he didn't deny it. "I wanted to give you a chance to show yourself. And you didn't disappoint. Your answer was brilliant, even better than I expected." I didn't know what to feel. On the one hand, it meant I hadn't gotten the job by chance, that Mater truly valued my professional qualities. On the other, it confirmed Stephanie's suspicions that he had used me to spite her. "Don't worry," Mater said, as if reading my thoughts. "I didn't offer you the job to get back at your mother-in-law, but because you genuinely deserve it. And your work over this past month has only proven me right." "Thank you," I said, feeling a wave of relief. "For the trust and for the chance." "You're welcome," he smiled. "Just keep doing what you're doing. You're doing great." That evening I thought for a long time about the strange twists of fate. About how a chance meeting can change your whole life. About how one phrase "go into the hall, country girl, let the guests laugh at you" had set off a chain of events that completely turned my existence upside down. If Stephanie hadn't tried to humiliate me in front of the guests, I would never have stepped into that hall. Mater wouldn't have spoken to me about pedagogy, wouldn't have offered me a job. I would have kept washing dishes, enduring humiliation, living in a marriage where I wasn't valued. The irony of fate was that Stephanie's attempt to finally break me had led to my liberation. To a new life where I could finally be myself, do the work I loved, feel valuable and needed. And the applause that broke out in the restaurant hall after my explanation of the ORF method became a kind of symbol of that liberation. The first recognition of my worth as a professional, as a person, as a human being. The divorce from Cullen was finalized quickly and without drama. We met in court, confirmed our decision to part, signed the necessary documents. He looked tired but calm, as if he had accepted the inevitable. "You look good," he said when we walked out of the courthouse. "The job suits you." "Thank you," I smiled. "I hope you're doing well too." "Fine," he shrugged. "Mom has calmed down a little. Found new investors for the restaurant. Business is going okay." "I'm glad," I said sincerely. Despite everything, I didn't wish them ill. "Give her my regards." We said goodbye like acquaintances, without hugs or promises to stay in touch. Both of us understood this was the end, that it was better for us to move forward on separate paths. I walked down the street feeling a strange lightness. As if a long, exhausting battle had ended, and now I could finally rest, gather strength, start anew. 3 months flew by like a single day. I immersed myself completely in my work at _Little Minds_, building the music program from scratch. In the mornings I rushed to the center, in the evenings I stayed late, developing teaching materials, choosing repertoire, drafting lesson plans. My colleagues joked that I lived at work, and there was some truth to it. After the divorce, my small rented apartment felt empty and lonely. One evening, near the end of the workday, Torre peeked into my office. "Gwen, it's almost 8 o'clock. You're staying late again?" I looked up from my music notebooks and gave her a guilty smile. "I'll just finish the program for the senior group and go. I promise." Against me, Torre sat down in the chair across from me. "You've done incredible work these past months. The children adore your lessons, the parents are thrilled. Derek says he's very pleased." "Thank you," I felt warmth spread inside me from her praise. "This is truly what I love doing." "But you work too much," she steadied me carefully. "Always here, no personal life at all. That's not healthy, Gwen." I sighed. "Work helps me not think about the past. Divorce is always a painful process." "Of course," Torre nodded. "But life goes on. By the way, I have a proposal for you. Derek is organizing a presentation of our center for potential partners. There will be representatives of regional educational institutions, investors, journalists. He wants you to conduct a demonstration lesson using your method." "Me?" I looked at her in surprise. But I've only been working here 3 months, and in that time you've achieved more than some do in years, Torre smiled. Your approach is unique, and Derek believes it should become the calling card of the center. I felt my cheeks flush. Even after several months at _little_minds_, I still wasn't used to my work being valued, to my opinion being respected. The presentation is in 2 weeks, Torre continued. You can choose the format, the group of children, everything you consider necessary. Full creative freedom. I'll do my best, I promised. Thank you for the trust. After Torre left, I sat for a long time, thinking. This was a chance to show myself on an entirely new level, in front of people who truly understood the value of education. I felt nervous and afraid, but above all excited and eager to prove I was worthy of that trust. The next 2 weeks I devoted to preparing for the presentation. I chose a mixed group of 8 children of different ages, designed a lesson plan that would showcase all the advantages of the ORF method, the integration of music, movement, speech, improvisation. I rehearsed with the children, adjusted the plan, thought through every detail. On the eve of the presentation, I was so anxious I couldn't sleep. I went over the scenario in my head, imagined possible questions, prepared answers. It felt like an exam, only far more important. The result would determine not just my reputation but also the prestige of the center. The morning of the presentation began with small mishaps. I overslept because I had forgotten to set the alarm. I rushed out of the house without breakfast, caught a taxi, and prayed the whole way not to be late. I arrived at the center 20 minutes before the start, out of breath and jittery. Torre met me in the lobby. Gwen, are you all right? You look flustered. I'm fine, I tried to smile. Just a little nervous. That's normal, she reassured me, laying a hand on my shoulder. But don't worry, you'll do wonderfully. The children are already in the music hall, waiting for you. I nodded, took a deep breath, and went to my little helpers. 8 pairs of curious eyes looked up at me as I entered the hall. Good morning, kids. I tried to make my voice sound lively and confident. Today is a special day. Guests are coming, and we'll show them what we've learned in our music classes. Are you ready? Yes, the children chorused, and their enthusiasm calmed my nerves a little. We did a short warm-up, repeated the key points of the lesson. The children were in excellent spirits, everything was going smoothly. I began to believe the presentation would succeed. 10 minutes before the scheduled time, Torre peeked into the hall. The guests are gathering in the conference room. Derek is giving the introductory presentation, then they'll come here. Are you ready? I looked around the hall, the instruments laid out, the children in high spirits, the lesson plan clearly in my head. Ready. Torre nodded and left. I gathered the children in a circle. Remember, the most important thing is not how perfectly you perform the task, but how much you enjoy the music and movement. Just be yourselves, and everything will work out. The children smiled, nodded, and I felt their trust and openness give me strength and confidence. 15 minutes later, the doors of the music hall opened, and a group of people entered, led by Derek Mater. I counted about 20 men and women in business suits with notebooks and tablets in hand. They settled into the chairs arranged along the walls and prepared to watch. Ladies and gentlemen, Mater began. Now you will see a demonstration lesson in musical development based on Carl Orff's method, adapted by our teacher, Gwen Verdi. This is an innovative approach that integrates music, movement, speech, and improvisation for the child's harmonious development. He nodded to me, handing over the floor, and stepped back to the wall. I felt all eyes on me, assessing, curious, critical. For a moment, a wave of panic surged through me. What if I made a mistake? What if the children didn't enjoy the lesson? What if the guests considered my method useless? But then I looked at the children. They sat in a circle, waiting eagerly, their trusting eyes fixed on me. And I remembered why I had chosen this profession, why I loved working with children, their sincerity, their openness to new things, their ability to find joy in every moment. Good afternoon, I began, addressing the guests. Today we'll show you how music can become not just a subject to be studied but a tool for developing a child's thinking, speech, social skills, and creative potential. I turned to the children. Let's start with our welcome song. The lesson went according to plan. We began with a rhythmic warm-up using claps, stomps, finger snaps. Then we moved on to vocal exercises, sound, and word games. The children eagerly joined in at each stage, completed the tasks, improvised. Gradually, I forgot about the adults watching us, fully immersed in the process, enjoying the interaction with the children, their reactions, their creativity. We played simple musical instruments, xylophones, metallophones, tambourines, maracas, creating an improvised orchestra. We composed musical stories where each instrument represented a character. We staged musical scenes where sounds helped express emotions and actions. Time flew by unnoticed. When I announced the lesson was ending and we would sing the final song, I was surprised to see that the guests, who had begun as restrained observers, were now watching with genuine interest, smiling, some even unconsciously tapping out the rhythm. The final song was my special pride. I had composed it specifically for this lesson, weaving into the melody and lyrics the elements we had studied with the children over the past weeks. It was a kind of summation of our work, a demonstration of the results we had achieved. When the last notes faded, the hall fell silent for a moment. Then came the applause, first from Mater, then from the rest of the guests. They applauded standing, with genuine smiles on their faces. I felt tears welling in my eyes. This was recognition, true recognition of my work, my approach, my talent. Not condescending praise, not a formal evaluation, but sincere admiration from people who understood the value of education. Amazing, Mater said, walking up to me. This is exactly the kind of approach we want to promote in our centers. Comprehensive, creative, developing not only musical skills but also thinking and emotional intelligence. The guests surrounded us, asking questions about the method, the results, the possibility of implementing this approach in other educational institutions. I answered, feeling an extraordinary surge of energy and confidence in my words. After the guests left the hall to continue their tour of the center, Torre came over to me. "Gwen, that was magnificent," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "You exceeded all expectations. Derek is thrilled." "Thank you," I couldn't hold back a smile. "The children were just wonderful." "That's your achievement," she countered. "You created the atmosphere where they could open up. That's worth a great deal." I released the children for lunch, thanking each one for participating, and began to put away the instruments. My heart was overflowing with deep satisfaction and joy. At last, I was where I belonged, doing what I loved and what I was good at, and receiving the recognition I deserved. That evening, Mater invited me into his office. He was sitting at his desk, looking through some documents, but as soon as I entered, he set them aside and pointed to the chair opposite him. "Please, have a seat, Gwen. I want to thank you once again for today's presentation. You caused a sensation." "Really?" I couldn't hide my surprise. "Absolutely," he nodded. "After your lesson, 3 representatives of regional educational centers expressed interest in introducing a similar method in their institutions. And 2 investors showed interest in financing the expansion of our network." I listened in growing astonishment. Could my lesson really have made such an impression? But most importantly, Mater continued, "Your approach fully matches our educational philosophy, development through creativity, respect for the child's individuality, creating a supportive environment. That's why I want to offer you a new position." "A new position?" I wasn't sure I'd heard correctly. "Yes. Head of musical development, not just in our center, but throughout the entire _Little Minds network. You'll develop a unified methodology, train teachers, oversee the implementation of the program across all our branches." I was speechless. This was far more than I could have dreamed of just 3 months ago when I was washing dishes in Stephanie's restaurant. "That's a very responsible position," I finally managed. "Are you sure I can handle it?" "Absolutely sure," Mater said firmly. "In these months you've proven that you're not only a talented educator, but also an excellent organizer, capable of designing systemic solutions and implementing them in practice." He handed me a folder with documents. "Here's the contract with a description of the duties, conditions, and, of course, the compensation. Review it, Think over the offer. I'm not asking for an immediate answer. I took the folder, still unable to believe what was happening. Thank you for the trust, Derek. I truly appreciate this. Don't thank me, he smiled. You earned it with your hard work and talent. And, Gwen, I'm glad I wasn't wrong about you that day in the restaurant. I left his office with the feeling that my life was taking another sharp turn. Another chance, another opportunity to rise higher, to prove my worth, to realize my potential. At home, I studied the contract carefully. The position was truly serious, with broad powers, the ability to shape the educational policy of the entire network, to influence the development of musical education nationwide. And the salary. It was twice my current one, which already seemed incredibly generous compared to my kindergarten salary and especially compared to dishwashing. But with the opportunities came responsibility. I would have to travel frequently between branches, conduct training seminars for teachers, develop methodological materials to be used in all centers of the network. This was no longer just teaching but also management work, requiring entirely different skills and approaches. Was I ready for such a challenge? 3 months ago, I probably would have been scared and refused. But now, after everything I had been through, after finding the strength to stand up to Stephanie, to end an unhealthy marriage, to start a new life, now I felt capable of more than I had ever thought possible. I signed the contract the next morning, feeling a mixture of excitement, fear, and anticipation. Mater shook my hand with a satisfied smile. Welcome aboard, Gwen. I'm sure great things await us. The new position demanded full commitment. I threw myself into the work, developing a unified program of musical development for all age groups, creating training materials for teachers, planning a system to monitor the quality of program implementation. A month later, I went on my first business trip to the Little Minds branch in a neighboring city. I conducted a series of master classes for local teachers, demonstration lessons for children, and meetings with parents. I returned inspired and even more certain of the rightness of my chosen path. Over the next 6 months, I visited all 10 branches of the network, implementing my methodology, training staff, setting up processes. The work was intense, but I enjoyed every moment of it. For the first time in my life, I felt that I was doing something truly meaningful, that I was influencing the lives of many children, that my knowledge and experience were genuinely valued. My personal life, of course, suffered from such a schedule. I never made friends in the new city. There simply wasn't time. Relationships. After the divorce with Cullen, I didn't even think about starting new ones. The wound was still too fresh, and my trust in men was deeply shaken. Sometimes in the evenings, returning to my empty apartment after a long workday, I felt a sting of loneliness. But in the morning, I would dive back into work, and those thoughts would retreat. One day, coming back from another business trip, I found a strange envelope in my mailbox. No return address, my name written by hand. Inside was a newspaper clipping a short article about the city's restaurant business. It mentioned that the Empire Taste chain was going through tough times, several locations had closed, and the rest were barely breaking even. I reread the article several times, not understanding who could have sent it to me and why. The information wasn't secret. Anyone could have read this in the paper. But someone thought it important that I knew about my former mother-in-law's troubles. My first thought was to throw the clipping away and forget it. Stephanie's affairs no longer concerned me. But curiosity won. I decided to check the information. Fortunately, the internet made it possible without direct contact with my former relatives. It was true, things at Empire Taste were going badly. 2 of the 5 restaurants had closed, the others were fighting for survival. On social media, there were even rumors of possible bankruptcy. Malicious tongues linked the problems to Mater's refusal to invest, after which other potential partners also turned away. I felt a strange emotion reading this news. Not gloating, no. More like a sad realization of how our choices and actions come back to us. Stephanie had always built her business on strict control, manipulation, and hierarchy. She believed fear and submission were the best motivators for employees. Maybe that worked in the past, but times were changing, and her management style was becoming less and less effective. I wondered how Cullen felt in all this. He had always been so eager to live up to his mother's expectations, to earn her approval. Now, when the business she had built her whole life and that was supposed to be his inheritance was collapsing before his eyes, he must have been suffering just as much as she was. I caught myself missing him. Not the husband who always sided with his mother in our conflicts, but the Cullen I had met 3 years earlier. The kind, passionate man full of plans and dreams. The man who said he loved me for my sincerity and lack of pretense. Who looked at me as if I were the most extraordinary person on earth. Where had that Cullen gone? Had he dissolved under his mother's influence? Or had he never really existed, and it was just an image I had created in my imagination? Thinking about this, I decided to take a walk before bed. The evening was warm, the city streets lively, people coming home from work, sitting in cafes, simply enjoying the summer weather. I walked without direction, letting my feet carry me wherever they wanted. And, of course, they carried me to _the aristocrat _. I stopped across from the restaurant, staring at the familiar sign, the glowing windows, the patrons entering and leaving through the massive doors. On the outside, everything looked the same luxurious facade, the same manicured flower beds at the entrance, the same doorman in his impeccable uniform. Nothing suggested the problems described in the article. But I knew that outward gloss often concealed inner rot. Especially in Stephanie's business, where appearances had always mattered more than reality. I was about to leave when the restaurant door opened and Cullen came out. He looked tired and somehow lost. He paused on the steps, lit a cigarette, a habit I thought he had long since kicked. I froze, not knowing what to do. Leave before he noticed me? Or walk over, say hello, ask how he was? It had been nearly 9 months since our divorce. Enough time for wounds to begin healing. But was I ready for this meeting? While I hesitated, Cullen raised his head and saw me. His face showed surprise mixed with something else. Joy? Sadness? I couldn't tell. He stubbed out his cigarette and slowly walked toward me, stopping a few steps away. Gwen, is that really you? Hello, Cullen, I tried to make my voice sound calm. Yes, it's me. You've changed, he said, giving me a look filled with astonishment. I knew what he meant. In these months, I had changed not only inside, but outside too. A new haircut, more elegant clothes, confident posture. I no longer looked like the hounded dishwasher he had last seen at the courthouse. Thank you, I smiled faintly. You've changed too. It was true. He looked older, more serious. There was a weariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. His shoulders slumped slightly, as if under a heavy burden. Yes, he gave a mirthless chuckle. The last few months have been difficult. I nodded, not knowing what to say. Asking about the restaurant seemed inappropriate. I already knew things weren't going well. Asking about his personal life seemed strange too. We were strangers now, bound only by a shared past. I heard you're doing well, Cullen said unexpectedly. Mater promoted you to some important position. Yes, I nodded, surprised that he knew about my life. I'm now head of the music program for the entire Little Minds network. I travel a lot between branches, implement the methodology, train teachers. That's great, he smiled sincerely. I always knew you were talented. I'm glad at least one of us has things working out. There was no envy or bitterness in his words. Only a weary acceptance of the reality in which his affairs were going far worse than mine. And how about you? I finally dared to ask. How are things at the restaurant? He shrugged. They could be better. Mom is trying to save the business with everything she has, but times have changed. Competition is tougher, customers more demanding. And we kept working with the old methods for too long. I nodded, understanding what he meant. Stephanie had always looked down on new trends in the restaurant industry, on social media, on customer reviews, on modern service concepts. She believed that tradition was eternal and saw no need to change. Maybe you should try something new? I suggested. Refresh the concept, attract a younger audience? Cullen gave a bitter half-smile. I've suggested that. Many times. But Mom, you know, she hates change. She believes the aristocrat must remain faithful to its traditions. I remembered how Stephanie reacted to any proposals to change the menu, the decor, the service system. Always negatively, always with the attitude, we've been doing this for 20 years, and it's always been fine, I'm sorry, I said sincerely. I know how much this business means to you and your mother. Thank you, he nodded. But you know, these last months have forced me to reconsider a lot. I realized that the restaurant is just a business. Not life itself, not the only thing that matters. I looked at him in surprise. That was so unlike the Cullen I had known. For him, his mother's restaurant business had always been sacred, the purpose of existence, the meaning of life. What do you mean? He was silent for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. After our divorce, I did a lot of thinking. About why everything went wrong. About the mistakes I made. And the biggest one was letting Mom control not only the business but my personal life too. I didn't know what to say. It was an admission I had never expected to hear from him. Gwen, he looked me straight in the eyes. I want to apologize. For not supporting you when you needed it. For always siding with my mother, even when she was wrong. For letting her humiliate you, put you in unbearable situations. I felt a lump rise in my throat. These were the words I had longed to hear a year ago, when our marriage could still have been saved. But now, with months of separation between us, a finalized divorce, new careers, and maybe even new relationships. What did they mean now? Cullen, I said his name softly. It matters to me. Thank you for saying it. But the past can't be brought back. We've both moved on. I know, he nodded. And I'm not asking for a second chance. I just wanted you to know that I realized my mistakes and maybe became a little better as a person. There was such sincerity, such openness in his words that I couldn't help but smile. I'm glad to hear that. Truly. We stood on the sidewalk across from the restaurant, two people who had once been close, now almost strangers. But something had changed in the air between us. The bitterness, the resentment, the tension were gone. All that remained was a quiet acceptance of what had been and what now was. Maybe we could have some coffee? Cullen suddenly suggested. Just talk. Like old friends. I hesitated. Was it a good idea? Wouldn't it reopen old wounds? But something told me this conversation was necessary for both of us. For closure, for acceptance, to truly move on without the weight of unspoken grievances. All right, I agreed. But not at the aristocrat . He smiled, understanding the reason behind my condition. Of course. There's a decent cafe nearby. We walked down the evening street, keeping a distance not only physical, but emotional. Two people tied by a shared past, but with different futures ahead. The cafe turned out to be a cozy place with soft lighting, quiet music, and friendly staff. We took a table in the corner, ordered coffee, and for a while sank into an awkward silence. How's your mother? I finally asked, deciding to start with a neutral topic. Cullen sighed. Managing. Trying to save the business with everything she has. But it's hard. She's used to everything going according to her plan, to her being in control. And now everything is slipping away. And you? How are you handling it? I'm trying to help her. But it's complicated. We argue a lot about how to run the business, what decisions to make. She thinks I'm not experienced enough, not devoted enough. I think she's too conservative, too stubborn. I nodded. That sounded familiar. Stephanie had always believed only she knew what was right and never listened to anyone else's opinion. But you know what's strangest? Cullen continued. For the first time in my life, I'm not afraid to argue with her. Not afraid to stand my ground. Maybe because I have nothing left to lose. That's good, I smiled. You've always been smart and talented. You just didn't always believe in yourself enough to stand up to her. He looked at me thoughtfully. You always saw the best in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. That's something I always valued in you, Gwen. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks. It was a compliment sincere and unexpected. And it touched something deep inside, something I had tried to bury after our divorce. And how's your personal life? Cullen asked, changing the subject. Are you seeing anyone? I shook my head. No. No time for relationships. Work takes all my thoughts and energy. I understand, he nodded. It's the same with me. Except instead of work, it's trying to save the family business. We talked about different things, about my new job, about his attempts to modernize the restaurant, about mutual acquaintances, about city news. We avoided the sharp corners, stayed away from painful subjects. Just two people who had once been close, now trying to find a new way of talking to each other. When we left the cafe, night had already fallen. Cullen offered to walk me home, and I agreed. We strolled through the evening streets, and there was something new between us, not the closeness of former spouses, but not the detachment of strangers either. Some strange, in-between state I couldn't quite define. At the entrance to my building, Cullen stopped. Thank you for tonight, Gwen. It was good to talk to you. Me too, I smiled. Strange, but good. He hesitated, as if wanting to say something more, but then simply nodded. Take care of yourself. You too, I replied. He turned to leave, but I stopped him. Cullen, about the restaurant. If you want my opinion, you should take control into your own hands. As long as your mother refuses to change, the business will keep declining. Sometimes you have to act decisively, even if it means going against the wishes of the people closest to you. He looked at me for a long time, then slowly nodded. You're right. I know that. It's just hard. I know, I said gently. But you're stronger than you think. And smarter than she lets you be. He smiled, and in that smile was something of the Cullen I had once fallen in love with. Thank you, Gwen. For everything. When he left, I stood at the entrance for a long time, watching him go. A strange feeling filled me, not love, not nostalgia, but a quiet sadness. As if I had finally closed the door to the past, not with the slam of resentment, but with the soft rustle of acceptance. Back in my apartment, I couldn't sleep, turning over our meeting in my mind, Cullen's words, his admission of mistakes. It mattered to me to know that he had realized where he'd been wrong. Not so that I could return to him, not to claim some victory, but simply for inner peace, for closing that chapter of my life with the feeling that it hadn't all been in vain. The next 2 weeks I threw myself into work with fresh energy. I prepared for a trip to the most distant _little minds _branch, developed new teaching materials, held online consultations for educators. Meeting Cullen seemed to have freed a part of my mind still occupied with the past, and now I could fully focus on the present and future. One evening, as I was finishing packing my suitcase for the trip the next day, the doorbell rang. That was odd, I wasn't expecting anyone, and couriers usually called ahead. When I looked through the peephole, I froze in surprise. Standing on the landing was Stephanie. She looked different, not as polished as usual, her hairstyle slightly disheveled, dark shadows under her eyes. But she still carried herself upright, with her customary dignity. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and opened the door. Stephanie? To what do I owe this? She gave me a measuring look, but this time there was no familiar contempt in her eyes. Rather, a kind of weary acceptance. Hello, Gwen. May I come in? I need to talk to you. I hesitated, weighing all the pros and cons. On the one hand, this woman had done everything to turn my life into hell. On the other, I was no longer the frightened girl who could be humiliated or intimidated. I had become stronger, more self-assured. Whatever she had to say, I could hear it with dignity. Come in, I said, stepping aside to let her into the apartment. Stephanie entered, looking around my place. I braced for some dismissive remark about the modest furnishings, but she said nothing, only nodded, as if what she saw matched her expectations. Tea? Coffee? I offered, remembering my manners. No, thank you, she shook her head. I won't stay long. I don't want to take up your time. We went into the living room. I pointed her to an armchair and sat opposite. Between us was a coffee table, a physical barrier that strangely gave me confidence. So, I said when the silence dragged on. What did you want to talk about? Stephanie straightened in her chair, just as she always did before an important conversation. I've come on business. A business proposal, to be precise. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. That was the last thing I expected to hear. My restaurant _the aristocrat _ is going through hard times, she went on, as if she were discussing the weather and not the collapse of her life's work. Clients are going to competitors, revenues are falling, the reputation is suffering. I listened in silence, not understanding what any of this had to do with me. Cullen thinks, she said her son's name with a hint of tension, that we need to completely renew the concept. Attract a new audience, change the approach to service, even revise the menu. And what do you think about that? I asked, still unsure where this was leading. Stephanie sighed. I think he's right. Much as I hate to admit it. Times have changed, and either we change with them or we lose everything. I nodded. It was an unexpectedly mature admission from a woman who had always believed only her way of doing business was valid. But a new concept isn't enough, she continued. We need something special, something that will draw people in, make them talk about us, recommend us to their friends. And what would that be? Music, Stephanie said firmly. Live music. Not the cliché of a piano in the corner, but something unique. Atmospheric. Something that creates a mood and makes people want to come back again and again. I was beginning to understand where she was heading, but I still couldn't believe it. Cullen told me about your work at _Little Minds _. She pronounced the name of the competing company with a touch of disdain. About the method you developed, how you use music to create a special atmosphere, to influence emotions. And? I tried to keep my voice neutral. And I want to offer you a collaboration. Stephanie looked me straight in the eye. To develop a musical concept for _the aristocrat _. Select the repertoire, choose the musicians, create a special atmosphere that will become our trademark. I could hardly believe my ears. This woman, who 9 months ago had forced me to wash dishes, humiliated me in front of guests, did everything to destroy my marriage, was now asking me for help. Are you serious? Was all I could manage. Absolutely, she nodded. This would be paid work, of course. We are prepared to offer a decent fee for your consultations and for developing the concept. I studied her, trying to figure out what game she was playing. Was her business really in such a desperate state that she was willing to turn to her former daughter-in-law, the one she had always despised? Why me? I asked bluntly. There are plenty of music consultants in the city, specialists in building atmosphere for venues. Why me? Stephanie hesitated, as if weighing how candid she should be. Because you're the best. Your method at _Little Minds _ created a sensation. People are talking about it, praising it, other educational centers are already trying to copy it. You have a gift, Gwen. A gift that could save my restaurant. That admission must have cost her dearly. I could see her shoulders tense, her lips pressed tight. For her, asking for help was almost physically painful. Even more so, asking me, the person she had always considered beneath her. I work full-time at _Little Minds _ I said. I have a contract, obligations. I can't just up and start consulting your restaurant. I'm not asking you to quit, she shook her head. This would be a few consultations, the development of a concept we would then implement ourselves. It wouldn't take much of your time. I thought it over. The offer was unexpected, strange, but in a way flattering. Stephanie was acknowledging my professionalism, my talent. That was what I had always wanted from her, recognition of my worth as a specialist, as a person. But on the other hand, could I trust her? Wasn't this just another manipulation, another attempt to draw me into her games? And even if she was sincere, was I ready to work with someone who had caused me so much pain? I need to think about it, I finally said. It's an unexpected offer. Of course, she nodded. I understand. But don't think too long. Time is working against us. Stephanie stood to leave. At the door she stopped, as if remembering something. Cullen said you saw each other recently. That you had. A good conversation. I nodded, not sure what to add. He's changed, she went on. He's become tougher, more decisive. He even argues with me now, defends his opinions. That never used to happen. In her voice was a mixture of surprise and something almost like respect. As if she was only now beginning to see her son as an adult, independent man rather than an extension of herself. Maybe that's for the best, I said cautiously. Cullen is intelligent and talented. He deserves the right to make his own decisions. Stephanie looked at me with a long, appraising gaze. Maybe you're right. Maybe I really did keep him under my wing for too long. That admission, even partial, surprised me more than the business proposal. Could Stephanie really be rethinking her relationship with her son? Or was this just another mask, another attempt at manipulation? Think about my offer, she said, opening the door. And call me when you've decided. When she left, I sat for a long time in a daze, trying to process what had just happened. Stephanie, the proud, domineering woman who had always considered me unworthy of her son, had come to my home to ask for help. She had acknowledged my talent, my professionalism. It was so unexpected, so unlike her, that I couldn't believe in the sincerity of her intentions. I decided to consult someone I trusted. I called Torre and briefly outlined the situation, without going into the personal details of my history with my former mother-in-law. An interesting offer, Torre said thoughtfully. From a professional standpoint, it could be a valuable experience. To apply your skills in a completely different field, to see how methods of musical influence work in the restaurant business. But I sensed there was a reservation behind her words. But there's also the ethical side, she continued. You work at _Little Minds _, you're the face of our company. Collaborating with another business, even in another field, could be seen ambiguously. Especially considering that the owner of the restaurant is your former mother-in-law. I understood her concerns. Indeed, the situation was delicate. I didn't want to let Mater down, the man who had believed in me, who had given me the chance to start a new life. What would you advise? I asked. Talk to Derek, Torre replied. Explain the situation, tell him about the proposal. He's a reasonable man, he'll understand all the nuances. That advice seemed sound. I decided to postpone my decision until I could speak with Mater, who was due back from his trip in 3 days. The next morning I flew out on my scheduled assignment, immersing myself fully in work at the branch. I held training sessions for teachers, open classes for children, meetings with parents. But thoughts of Stephanie's proposal never left me. What lay behind it? Had she truly acknowledged my professionalism? Or was it some elaborate game, the purpose of which I still couldn't see? When I returned to the city, I immediately reached out to Mater and asked for a meeting. He received me in his office, listened carefully to the story about my former mother-in-law's proposal, without interrupting or showing any emotion. Interesting, he said when I finished. And what do you think about it, Gwen? I don't know, I admitted honestly. On the one hand, it's a professional challenge, an opportunity to apply my knowledge in a new field. On the other hand, I'm not sure I'm ready to work again with someone who caused me so much pain in the past. Mater tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table. From a business standpoint, I don't see a conflict of interest. Little Minds and the restaurant the aristocrat operate in different fields, they're not competitors. Your consultations on the restaurant's musical concept in no way contradict your work with us. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. But there is also the personal aspect, Mater went on. Are you sure you're emotionally ready for such cooperation? Won't it affect your psychological state, and therefore your work here? It was the right question, the same one I had been asking myself for days. Was I ready to face Stephanie again, even in a professional context? Wouldn't it stir up old wounds, drag me back into a state of vulnerability and insecurity? I think I can handle it, I said after a pause. I'm no longer that intimidated girl who could be humiliated or frightened. I'm a professional, confident in my knowledge and abilities. And I will act from that position. Mater smiled. Then I see no reason to refuse. Moreover, I think it could be a useful experience. And who knows, maybe successful cooperation with a restaurant will open new perspectives for _little minds_ in the field of corporate training and consulting. I looked at him in surprise. You mean my work with the restaurant could become a pilot project for a new direction in our company? Yes, that's exactly what I mean, Mater nodded. We've been thinking for a while about expanding beyond the strictly educational sphere. Musical concepts for businesses, communication training through art for corporate clients, these are promising areas. I listened with growing excitement. What had begun as a strange proposal from my former mother-in-law was suddenly turning into an opportunity for new professional growth, for developing an entirely new direction in my career. If you decide to accept the proposal, Mater continued, then act as a representative of _little minds_. Let it be an official collaboration between our company and the restaurant, not your personal side job. That will be more professional and, I think, more comfortable for you. I nodded, seeing the logic in his words. Indeed, having the official status of a consultant from _little minds_ would give me additional protection, placing my relationship with Stephanie on a strictly professional basis. Thank you, Derek, I said sincerely, for your support and understanding. You're welcome, he smiled. Just remember, you now represent not only yourself, but also our company. And act accordingly. When I left Mater's office, I felt a strange mix of excitement and determination. I was preparing to return to the restaurant where I had been humiliated, where I had been a dishwasher, where I had endured one of the hardest periods of my life. But now I was returning not as a frightened daughter-in-law of the owner, but as a respected consultant, an expert in my field, a representative of a successful company. That thought gave me strength and confidence. I decided to call Stephanie and tell her my decision. But before that, I wanted to meet with Cullen, to hear his opinion about the situation. We agreed to meet at the same cafe where we had talked the last time. Cullen arrived exactly on time. He looked better than at our previous meeting, more rested, more energetic. Mom said she came to see you, he began without preamble as soon as we sat down. That she offered you a collaboration? I nodded. Yes, it was. Unexpected. For me too, he gave a faint smile. I only found out afterwards. She just told me she was going to you with a business proposal. I tried to dissuade her. I thought you'd refuse to even speak to her after everything that happened. I was surprised myself that I let her in, I admitted. But you know, it was interesting to see her in the role of petitioner, not judge and ruler. Cullen nodded. She's changed. The problems with the business have hit her self-esteem hard, her image of herself as an infallible leader. For the first time in her life, she's faced a situation she can't control, can't solve with willpower and authority. And how is she handling it? With difficulty, he sighed. But in some ways, it's been good for her. She's begun to listen to others more, less categorical in her judgments. Even with me, she talks differently now, like with an equal, not like with a child who always needs to be directed and controlled. I thought of my own conversation with Stephanie, of how she had admitted that maybe she had kept her son under her wing for too long. Could there have been some sincerity in her words? Do you think her offer of collaboration is sincere? I asked directly. Or is it some kind of manipulation? Cullen considered it. I think it's a mix of both. On the one hand, she really is desperate and ready to ask for help even from those she once considered unworthy. On the other, she always calculates several moves ahead. Maybe she hopes that through this collaboration she can somehow influence me, you, our relationship. His words made me wary. Our relationship? You mean? I don't know exactly what she has in mind, Cullen shook his head. But I wouldn't be surprised if her plans included something about a possible reconciliation between us. She might think that by working together on saving the restaurant, we'll grow close again. The thought had never crossed my mind, but it sounded entirely plausible. Stephanie had always loved controlling every aspect of her son's life, including his personal one. And if once she had done everything possible to destroy our marriage, now, with her business in danger, she might have decided that a reunion with her former daughter-in-law, now a successful professional, would benefit the family enterprise. Do you think I should refuse? I asked. Cullen looked me straight in the eyes. No. I think you should agree, but be very careful. Don't let her manipulate you, don't fall into her games. Act strictly professionally. I nodded. That's exactly what I plan to do. By the way, I spoke with Mater. He suggested framing this as an official collaboration between _Little Minds _ and _ the Aristocrat _, not as my personal consultation. Smart move, Cullen nodded approvingly. That will give you extra protection and set the relationship on a business footing. We discussed a few more details of the potential collaboration. Cullen told me about the changes they had already begun implementing in the restaurant, their plans for updating the menu, the interior, the service system. I was surprised by his enthusiasm and by the depth of his understanding of the business's problems. He had truly grown as a professional and as a person. When we were saying goodbye, Cullen suddenly took my hand. Thank you, Gwen, for agreeing to help despite everything that happened. I'm not doing this for your mother, I said honestly. And not even for you, but for myself. To prove that I can return to the place where I was humiliated and stand tall. To close this chapter of my life with dignity. He nodded, understanding. That matters. And I respect your decision. We parted with a feeling that something new had settled between us, not friendship, not love, but a kind of mutual respect, an acceptance of the past, and a readiness to move forward. The next day I called Stephanie and informed her of my decision to accept her proposal, but only under the condition of official collaboration between _Little Minds _ and _ the Aristocrat _. She was silent for a few seconds, as if weighing the situation, then agreed, thanking me curtly for my willingness to help. We arranged our first meeting at the restaurant the following day. I carefully considered my appearance, a strict business suit, minimal jewelry, discreet makeup. I had to look like a professional, an expert there to help a business, not like the former daughter-in-law of the owner. When I entered the Aristocrat _ through the main entrance, not through the service door I had used during my time as a dishwasher, a strange feeling swept over me. It was as though I had returned to a place that had once been part of my life, but now I perceived it in a completely different way. Not as a source of humiliation and pain, but as a work project, a professional assignment. The maitre d', the very same one who had barely noticed me before, now bowed politely. Good afternoon, Ms. Verdi. They are expecting you in the director's office. I walked through the dining hall, feeling the curious glances of the staff. Many recognized me, the former dishwasher who had now returned to the restaurant as a consultant. I kept my back straight, my head high, my steps steady and confident. I was no longer that intimidated girl, and I wanted everyone to see it. In the director's office, Stephanie and Cullen were waiting. She sat behind her massive desk, he stood by the window. Both looked tense, but in different ways, she composed, ready for a business meeting, he uncertain, unsure how to behave in this strange situation where his former wife and his mother were supposed to work together. Good afternoon, I nodded to both of them. Thank you for agreeing to the _Little Minds _ terms of cooperation. We're grateful for your help, Stephanie said formally, as if addressing an unfamiliar business partner. Please, sit down, and let's discuss the details. I sat across from her, took out a notebook and pen. Before we begin, I'd like to clarify a few points. First, I am acting as a representative of _Little Minds _ and all our agreements will be arranged through the company. Second, I am ready to develop a musical concept for the restaurant, conduct staff training, but the implementation and further support must be taken on by your employees. Third, all our interactions will be strictly professional, without reference to the past or personal relationships. Stephanie listened with an impassive face. When I finished, she simply nodded. Conditions accepted. We fully agreed to professional cooperation without personal aspects. Cullen, still by the window, smiled faintly. He seemed pleased with my firmness and clarity of position. Excellent, I opened my notebook. Now tell me more about your plans for updating the restaurant. What audience do you want to attract? What atmosphere do you want to create? What values do you want to project through your brand? We spent the next hour discussing the concept of the renewed _aristocrat _. Stephanie spoke calmly, to the point, without emotion. Cullen was more open, sharing ideas, asking my opinion. I took notes, asked clarifying questions, suggested options for musical design that could fit their vision. Gradually, the tension in the room began to fade. We were all professionals working toward a common goal. Personal histories were receding into the background before business interests. After discussing the main points, I asked to see the restaurant itself, to better understand the space, the acoustics, the possibilities for placing musicians or equipment. We walked through all the halls, and I carefully studied every corner, taking notes, photographs, measurements. When we passed by the kitchen, I involuntarily slowed my step. Through the open door I saw part of the room where I had spent 2 months washing dishes and swallowing tears of humiliation. Now that place seemed so ordinary, so insignificant. As if it hadn't been part of my life at all, but rather a scene from a movie I had once watched. Stephanie noticed my glance. We've completely updated the kitchen equipment, she said in a neutral tone. New dishwashers, ventilation system, work surfaces. I nodded, appreciating her attempt to avoid awkwardness. A good decision. Modern equipment increases staff efficiency. We continued the tour, and I tried to focus on the professional aspects, not letting memories distract me from the task. When the tour was over, we returned to the office to discuss the next steps. I suggested developing 3 versions of a musical concept with different budgets and levels of complexity, so they could choose the one best suited to their goals and resources. It will take about 2 weeks, I said. After that, we'll discuss the chosen option in more detail, and I'll prepare a full implementation plan. Stephanie nodded. Sounds reasonable. We'll wait for your proposals. When the meeting ended, Cullen offered to walk me to the exit. As we passed through the restaurant, he said quietly, "You were amazing. So professional, so confident. My mother is impressed, even if she doesn't show it." I smiled. "Thank you. I'm just doing my job. You know," he went on, "when I watched you analyzing the space, offering solutions, asking the right questions, I thought that maybe our divorce was for the best. Not for me, of course, but for you. You've blossomed, Gwen. You found yourself, your calling. Maybe with me and my mother, you never would have been able to grow like this." I thought about his words. There was truth in them. Maybe I really did have to go through all that painful experience, through humiliation and loss, to find my strength, my talent, my place in the world. "Maybe you're right," I said. "But you know, I don't regret our marriage. It was part of my path. Part of what made me who I am now." Cullen nodded, and in his eyes I saw understanding and perhaps a trace of sadness. "I'm sorry I couldn't be the husband you deserved. And I'm sorry I couldn't be the wife you needed," I replied. We stopped at the restaurant's exit. The moment was strangely intimate despite the public place. As if we had finally found the right words to close our story, to accept what had happened between us. "I'll see you in 2 weeks," I said, shifting back to a business tone. "I'll send the preliminary concepts earlier so you can review them." "Of course," he nodded. "See you, Gwen." I left the restaurant with a sense of strange serenity. Returning to the aristocrat hadn't stirred the storm of emotions I had feared. On the contrary, it gave me a sense of completion, of closing an old chapter of my life and opening a new one, professional, successful, filled with meaning and respect. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked on the musical concepts for the restaurant while continuing my primary duties at _Little Minds_. It wasn't easy juggling two projects, but I enjoyed the professional challenge, the chance to apply my knowledge in a new field. I developed 3 versions of the concept, each different in complexity and cost of implementation. The first suggested background music tailored to different zones of the restaurant and different times of day. The second included live music on weekends, a chamber ensemble or pianist performing classical and modern pieces in elegant arrangements. The third was the most ambitious, a complete rethinking of the restaurant's musical atmosphere, including themed music nights, guest artist performances, and interactive elements for guests. After sending the preliminary concepts to Stephanie and Cullen, I awaited their feedback with slight anxiety. Although I was confident in the quality of my work, part of me still expected criticism, nitpicking, attempts to devalue my ideas. But the response I received surprised me. Stephanie sent a short but polite letter in which she noted the professionalism of my approach and expressed interest in the third, most ambitious option. "If we've decided to change, then we must do it decisively," she wrote. "Half measures won't bring the desired result." Cullen was more emotional in his feedback. He called me in the evening, full of enthusiasm. "This is incredible, Gwen. Especially the third option. It's exactly what the aristocrat needs to stand out, attract a new audience, create a buzz in the city." His excitement was contagious, and I caught myself becoming genuinely engaged with the project, not just as a professional assignment, but as something that could really change the fate of the restaurant, make it special, unique. At the next meeting in the aristocrat, we discussed the details of the third concept. Stephanie asked precise, businesslike questions about the budget, implementation timeline, expected impact. Cullen was more focused on the creative side, which musicians, what repertoire, what interactive elements we could include. I answered all their questions, offered solutions, explained why certain elements of the concept were crucial for creating a cohesive atmosphere. Gradually, the formality of our interaction gave way to genuine professional interest. We were a team working on a common project, and our past relationships faded into the background before this shared goal. By the end of the meeting, we had approved the final version of the concept and drawn up an implementation plan. I was to prepare detailed recommendations on repertoire, on the placement of musicians and equipment, on the acoustic design of the premises. I also had to conduct interviews with potential musicians and training sessions for the restaurant staff so that everyone understood how the musical atmosphere fit into the overall concept of the renewed aristocrat. Before we wrapped up, Stephanie unexpectedly suggested, "Perhaps you'd like to stay for dinner, Gwen? The chef has prepared several new dishes for the updated menu, and we would like to hear your opinion." I was surprised by this invitation. It went beyond the bounds of our business collaboration, becoming something more personal. But I also understood that to fully develop the musical concept, I needed to experience the restaurant's atmosphere as a guest, not only as a consultant. "Thank you for the invitation," I said. "I'd be happy to stay and try the new dishes. It will help me better understand what kind of music would harmonize most naturally with the cuisine." We moved into one of the restaurant's halls, where a table was set for tasting. The chef personally presented each dish, explaining the concept, the ingredients, the method of preparation. I listened with genuine interest, tasting each course, noting the nuances of flavor, textures, aromas. Stephanie observed my reactions carefully, but she did not pressure me, did not demand immediate assessments. Cullen kept the conversation light, telling me about how they had worked on updating the menu, what trends they had studied, what philosophy they wanted to bring into the cuisine. Gradually, the atmosphere at the table became less formal, more relaxed. We talked not only about the dishes and the music but also about general trends in the restaurant business, new concepts, successful cases from other cities and countries. I noticed that Stephanie's attitude toward me had changed. There was no trace of the usual disdain, condescension, or sharp remarks. She listened to my opinions with interest, sometimes argued, but she did so respectfully, with reasoned arguments. As if she were seeing me for the first time, not as a country girl who had accidentally ended up in their family, but as a professional whose opinion had value. When dinner came to an end, I sincerely thanked the chef for the excellent dishes and shared my thoughts on what kind of music could highlight their flavors, create the right mood for their appreciation. You have a remarkable sense of harmony, Gwen, Stephanie said unexpectedly. The ability to see the connections between different elements of an experience: taste, sound, atmosphere. It's a rare gift. I was caught off guard by this compliment. From a woman who for years had found nothing in me worthy of praise, such words sounded almost unreal. Thank you. I tried to keep my voice even. I just love my work and try to see how different elements can complement each other, creating a complete experience. She nodded, and I thought I saw something like respect flicker in her eyes. Not condescension, not polite interest, but genuine professional respect. When I was getting ready to leave, Cullen offered to walk me to the taxi. It was a cool evening, and we walked slowly toward the stand, finishing our discussion of project details. You know, he suddenly said, I've never seen my mother treat anyone outside the family like this. She truly values your professionalism, your approach to work. It's strange, I admitted. After everything that happened between us. People change, he shrugged. Sometimes for the better. The business problems forced her to rethink many of her convictions, her methods of dealing with people. She realized that an authoritarian leadership style doesn't work anymore, that you have to be able to listen to others, value their experience and ideas. I nodded, understanding what he meant. Hardships often force us to change, to reevaluate our values, our attitude toward the world and toward people. Perhaps Stephanie was going through her own transformation, just as I had gone through mine. And you? I asked. Have you changed too? Cullen looked thoughtfully into the distance. Yes, I think I have. I've become more independent, more decisive. I've learned to defend my opinions, even if they contradict my mother's. I've learned to take responsibility for my decisions instead of waiting for approval or instructions. That's good, I smiled sincerely. You've always been smart and capable. You just didn't always believe in yourself enough. He nodded, accepting my words. And you know what's funny? The more confident I become, the more I stand up to my mother in business matters, the more she respects me. As if that's what she was waiting for all these years for me to grow up, to become a real man, able to make decisions and take responsibility for them. I thought that perhaps that was exactly the case. Stephanie, for all her flaws, was a strong woman. Maybe she truly did want to see the same strength and decisiveness in her son. But her methods of upbringing, her control and pressure, had the opposite effect, making Cullen dependent, insecure, unable to stand against her will. In any case, he continued, I'm glad that we've been able to find a new format for our relationship. Not as husband and wife, but as colleagues, maybe even friends. I'm glad too, I said honestly. I enjoy working with you on this project. Seeing your enthusiasm, your ideas, your vision for the future of the restaurant. We reached the taxi stand. Cullen hesitated, as if he wanted to say something more, but then simply nodded. See you next week. We'll be waiting for your recommendations on the musicians. I got into the taxi with a strange feeling. The evening at the restaurant, dinner with Stephanie and Cullen, our conversation, all of it was so different from how we used to interact. As if the three of us had outgrown old grudges, old roles, old patterns of behavior, and could now communicate on a new level, as adults who respected one another. This didn't mean I had forgiven and forgotten everything Stephanie had done to me. It didn't mean the wounds from Cullen's betrayal had fully healed. But it was a step forward toward accepting the past and the possibility of building a new future without the weight of unforgiven resentments. The following weeks were filled with intensive work on the project. I conducted interviews with musicians, selected repertoire, developed programs for themed evenings. Cullen was actively involved in the process, offering ideas, discussing options, making adjustments. Stephanie focused more on the financial side, but even she showed genuine interest in the creative aspects of the project. Gradually, the concept was taking concrete shape. We decided to begin with weekly music evenings on Fridays and Saturdays, different genres, different performers, but always high quality and aligned with the restaurant's overall atmosphere. On weekdays, there would be background music, carefully chosen for different zones and times of day. And in the future, special thematic music events connected to specific cuisines, countries, or eras. Alongside the musical concept, other changes were taking place in the restaurant. The menu was being updated, the interior was acquiring more modern features, the staff were undergoing training in new service standards. Cullen was at the center of all these processes, coordinating the work of different specialists, monitoring deadlines and budgets. He looked confident, energetic, and deeply engaged in his work. Stephanie, to my surprise, was gradually stepping back, allowing her son to make key decisions. She still controlled financial matters, but in everything concerning concept, atmosphere, and staff, she trusted his judgment. This was a noticeable shift in their dynamic, and I could see how positively it affected Cullen, his confidence, his ability to make decisions. Finally, the day arrived when we were to hold the first music evening in the renewed _the aristocrat _. I chose a jazz quartet, a pianist, a double bassist, a saxophonist, and a vocalist. Their repertoire included classic jazz standards and elegant arrangements, perfectly suited to the restaurant's atmosphere. The restaurant was full of news about the aristocrats renewal, and its special music evening had spread through the city, attracting both regular patrons and a new audience. From a corner of the hall, I observed how the guests responded to the music, how it influenced their mood, their perception of the food and drinks, the overall atmosphere of the evening. The result exceeded my expectations. The music blended seamlessly into the space, creating an elegant but unpretentious atmosphere. Guests smiled, nodded in rhythm, some even quietly sang along to familiar melodies. The staff worked smoothly, adjusting to the rhythm of the music, creating a unified experience for the visitors. Stephanie walked among the tables, talking to guests, receiving compliments and thanks for the renewed restaurant. Cullen coordinated the staff, ensuring everything went according to plan. Both looked satisfied, even happy, seeing their creation come alive again in a new quality. At the end of the evening, when the last guests had left and the musicians were packing up their instruments, Stephanie approached me. "That was an incredible evening," she said, and her voice carried none of its usual restraint. "The music, the atmosphere, the guests' reactions, everything was just as you promised. Maybe even better." "Thank you," I smiled. "I'm glad everything worked out." She hesitated, as if gathering her thoughts, then said, "You know, Gwen, I have to admit I was wrong about you. All these years I thought you weren't good enough for our family, for our business. I thought you were just a provincial girl without any particular talent or ambition. But I was wrong. You are a talented, professional, determined person. And I regret the way I treated you." I was stunned. I had never expected to hear anything like this from Stephanie. Her admission of being wrong, her apology, it was so unlike the woman I knew, who had always considered herself infallible, always confident in her superiority. "Thank you for saying that," I said after a pause. "It means a lot to me. I know the past can't be undone," she continued. "That the wounds caused can't just be erased with apologies. But I wanted you to know, I value your work, your talent, your willingness to help us despite everything that happened between us." I nodded, not knowing what else to say. This admission was an important step toward healing old wounds, toward accepting the past and moving forward without the weight of unforgiven resentments. "And one more thing," Stephanie added, "I would like to offer you permanent collaboration. Not as a consultant from _Little Minds _, but as the personal music director of the aristocrat _, with full creative freedom and worthy compensation." The offer caught me off guard. I had never considered the possibility of permanent work in a restaurant. My career at Little Minds was successful, full of promise, and deeply fulfilling. "I don't know what to say," I admitted honestly. "This is unexpected. Don't answer right away," she made a conciliatory gesture. "Think it over. Weigh all the pros and cons. We're ready to create the most comfortable conditions for you." Cullen joined us, and the conversation shifted to broader topics: the impressions of the evening, guests' feedback, plans for the future. But Stephanie's offer continued to echo in my mind, making me reflect on what choice I wanted to make, which path I wanted to take for my future. That night I couldn't fall asleep for a long time, thinking about the strange turns of fate. Who could have imagined that the woman who once forced me to wash dishes to humiliate me would one day offer me the position of music director in her restaurant? Who could have guessed that the phrase "go out into the hall, country girl, let the guests laugh at you" would be the beginning of a journey that would lead me to professional recognition and respect? Life is unpredictable, I thought, staring at the ceiling of my small apartment. Sometimes what seems like the end turns out to be the beginning. Sometimes the people who hurt us end up helping us become stronger, better, more confident in ourselves. And sometimes, very rarely, even the most difficult relationships can transform into something new, healthier, more respectful. I didn't know whether I would accept Stephanie's offer. I didn't know if I wanted to tie my future to a restaurant that had been the source of so many painful memories. But I knew one thing: I was no longer afraid. Not of Stephanie, not of the memories, not of making choices. Whatever I decided, it would be my decision, based on my desires, my goals, my vision of the future. And that awareness filled me with calm and confidence. In the morning, I called Mater and told him about Stephanie's offer. He listened attentively, without interrupting, then said, "This is an interesting turn of events, Gwen. And what do you think about it?" "I'm not sure," I answered honestly. On the one hand, it's a new challenge, a new opportunity to apply my knowledge in a completely different sphere. On the other hand, I greatly value my work at _Little Minds_, the team, the projects we're developing. "I understand," he paused. "You know, Gwen, I don't want to influence your decision. But I want you to know, if you decide to accept this offer, I'll understand. And the doors of _Little Minds_ will always remain open to you, should you wish to return." His words touched me. It was an expression of respect for my professionalism, for my right to choose my own path. "Thank you, Derek. That means a lot to me. You know, Gwen," he added before we ended the conversation, "sometimes we find our calling in the most unexpected places. The important thing is to stay open to opportunities, even if they come from sources that once caused pain." Those words made me think. Maybe it really was my fate to return to the aristocrat but in a new role? Maybe there was some poetic justice in turning a place of humiliation into a place of triumph? I decided to give myself time to reflect. I continued working on both projects, my primary responsibilities at _Little Minds_ and the consulting for the aristocrat _. I watched the restaurant transform, watched Cullen grow as a manager, watched Stephanie learn to trust others and value their contributions. Every Friday and Saturday, the aristocrat hosted music evenings, each time with a new program, new performers. I curated these events, selected musicians, created repertoires, monitored acoustics and atmosphere. It was creative, engaging work that produced visible results. The restaurant was once again filling with visitors. People in the city were talking about it, recommending it to their friends. One evening, after a particularly successful music event, Cullen offered to walk me home. We strolled through the night city, discussing the evening, sharing impressions, planning future events. "You know," he suddenly said, stopping, "I've been meaning to ask, have you thought about my mother's offer? About the position of music director?" "I have," I stopped too. "But I haven't made a final decision yet." "May I ask what's holding you back?" He looked at me with genuine interest, without pressure or manipulation. I thought for a moment, then answered. "Probably fear. Fear that if I return to the aristocrat permanently, I'll find myself once again in the same toxic atmosphere, the same unhealthy relationships. That all the changes, all the respect, all the recognition of my professionalism, it's temporary. A mask that hides the same contempt, the same attempt to control and manipulate." Cullen listened attentively, without interrupting. When I finished, he said quietly, "I understand your concerns. After everything you went through because of us, they're more than justified." He paused, as if gathering his thoughts, then continued. "But you know, people really do change. Sometimes for the better. My mother has reconsidered many of her beliefs, her methods, her attitude toward people. Not just toward you, but toward all the staff, toward me, toward herself. This isn't a mask, not a temporary tactic. These are real changes, hard won, but I believe they're irreversible. I listened to him, trying to decide whether I believed his words. I wanted to believe. I wanted to think that people really could change, grow, become better. That past mistakes didn't define an entire future. And one more thing, Cullen added, if you decide to accept the offer, know this, I'll always be on your side. Not as your ex-husband, but as a colleague, as a friend, as someone who respects your professionalism and your character. His words touched me again. There was no manipulation in them, no hidden subtext. Only a sincere desire to help me make the right choice. Thank you, I said. I'll think about what you've said. We continued in comfortable silence. When we reached my building, Cullen stopped, as if he wanted to say something more, but then simply smiled. Good night, Gwen. Good night, Cullen. I went up to my apartment, still thinking about our conversation, about his words, about Stephanie's changes, about his promise of support. And gradually I began to understand that my fear was not so much about Stephanie or the aristocrat but about my own past, about the vulnerable, insecure girl I had been 3 years ago. But I was no longer that girl. I had become stronger, more confident, more professional. I knew my worth, my boundaries, my rights. And maybe that was exactly why I could afford to take a risk, to try something new even if it meant returning to a place that had once caused me pain. The next day I called Stephanie and asked for a meeting. We met in her office at the restaurant, the very place where she had once offered me a dishwashing job, where she humiliated me, where she did everything to make me feel small and insignificant. But now everything was different. I walked into that office with my head held high, confident in myself, and my skills, and my worth. I sat across from her not as a supplicant but as an equal, as a professional conducting business negotiations. I'm ready to accept your offer, I said without preamble. But I have conditions. Stephanie nodded, waiting for me to continue. First, full creative freedom within the restaurant's musical concept. I choose the repertoire, the musicians, the format of events. Second, a fixed budget for the music program, managed at my discretion. Third, respectful, professional treatment from management and staff. No personal attacks, no references to the past, no attempts at manipulation. I spoke firmly, clearly, without emotion, like a professional who knows her value and sets fair terms for collaboration. Stephanie listened attentively, without interrupting. When I finished, she simply nodded. The conditions are accepted. Fully and unconditionally. Good, I nodded in return. Then I'd like to discuss the details of the contract, the timeline, responsibilities, and compensation. We spent the next hour discussing the specific aspects of my future work at the restaurant. Stephanie was businesslike, concrete, without unnecessary emotion. I felt comfortable in that format of communication, professional with professional, without personal nuances, without past resentments. When all the details were agreed upon, she extended her hand for a handshake. Welcome to the team, Gwen. Officially. And this time in the role you deserve. I shook her hand, feeling a strange mix of emotions, satisfaction with what I had achieved, excitement before the new challenge, a slight unease at returning to a place that had been the source of so many painful memories. But above all, I felt a calm confidence in my choice. I wasn't naive, I didn't expect everything to suddenly become perfect. I knew there would be difficulties, conflicts, moments of tension. But I also knew I could handle them, protect my boundaries, defend my professional and personal interests. I decided to give it a chance to this new beginning, this opportunity to transform past pain into future success. And in that decision, in that readiness to take a risk, to try something new, I felt my strength, my maturity, my ability to move forward without letting the past define the future. When I stepped out of the restaurant, the street was bright and sunny. I drew in a deep breath of fresh air, feeling a strange sense of closure. I had returned to the place where my story of humiliation and pain had begun, but I had returned as an entirely different person, strong, confident, aware of my worth. And in that return, in that transformation, there was a kind of poetic justice. As if fate itself wanted to show me how far I had come, how much I had grown, how much I had learned. Sometimes life gives us strange, unexpected turns. Sometimes what seems like an ending is only a beginning. And sometimes a phrase spoken with contempt, "Go to the hall, country girl, let the guests laugh at you," becomes the first step on the path to success, recognition, and inner strength. I didn't know what lay ahead, what other trials or opportunities fate had prepared for me. But I knew I was ready to face them with an open heart and a strong spirit, without letting fear or past hurts determine my decisions, my actions, my life. And in that readiness, in that openness to the future, in that ability to transform pain into strength, I found my greatest victory.